Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Izuku was declared a UA traitor part 2. If you guys enjoy this what if and want to see part 3, comment down below and let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content and leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. The author of the story, 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗏 from Wattpad. So let's start the video. The flickering lights of Tartarus cast long, uneven shadows on the damp walls. Izuku Midoriya sat cross-legged on the cold floor of his cell, his mind honed to a razor's edge from the brutal training Stain had subjected him to. Yet, the next lesson would take him beyond the realm of instinct and precision. It would demand something far deeper, the complete acceptance of his own darkness. Stain, ever the embodiment of conviction, stood before Izuku. His presence was an oppressive weight, his scarred face twisted into a grim mask. But there was no malice in his gaze, only cold understanding. "You've learned to kill," Stain began, his voice low and deliberate. "You've mastered the tools, the instincts, the execution. But that's only half of the transformation. A true killer doesn't just act, they become. The darkness isn't something you wield. It's something you are." Izuku's emerald eyes, now devoid of their former light, met Stain's unflinchingly. "I understand," he said, his tone as cold and empty as the prison walls around them. "No," Stain snapped, shaking his head. "You don't. Not yet. But you will." Lesson 1. Understanding the darkness. The first step was comprehension. Stain led Izuku into a deeper part of the prison, a place where the screams of the damned echoed endlessly, their anguish a constant reminder of the cost of weakness. "This is where the worst are kept," Stain explained, gesturing to the cells lining the walls. "Killers. Betrayers. Monsters. But do you know what separates them from you, Midoriya?" Izuku glanced at the shadowy figures behind the bars, their eyes glinting with malice. "What?" "Fear," Stain said, his voice a growl. "They fear their own darkness. They act because they're afraid. But you must embrace it. Accept it fully. Only then will you be truly free." The lesson was not taught through words alone. Stain forced Izuku to confront the prisoners, each one a reflection of what he could become if he failed. There were men who had killed for greed, for vengeance, for sport. Their eyes burned with madness, their actions driven by desperation. "You're not like them," Stain said as they returned to their cell. "Your darkness isn't a weakness. It's your strength. Embrace it, and no one will be able to stop you." Lesson 2. Confronting the self. The next step was internal. Stain presented Izuku with a cracked mirror, its jagged edges reflecting a distorted image of the boy. "Look at yourself," Stain ordered, his tone harsh. "What do you see?" Izuku stared into the glass, his expression unreadable. "I see emptiness." "Good," Stain said, his lips curling into a smirk. "Now fill it. The darkness isn't just about what you've lost. It's about what you'll become. Every scar, every shadow, it's all part of you. Accept it. Own it." To force the confrontation, Stain used psychological tactics. He whispered doubts and fears into Izuku's ear, forcing him to relive the moments that had broken him: Bakugo's bullying, his mother's tears, the crushing weight of powerlessness. At first, the memories threatened to overwhelm him. But slowly, Izuku began to reshape them. The pain became fuel, the fear a weapon. Each memory was no longer a source of weakness but a foundation for his transformation. Lesson 3. Living in the shadows. To teach Izuku how to live within the darkness, Stain devised a series of exercises that blurred the line between reality and illusion. "You must learn to move unseen," Stain explained. "To exist in the spaces between light and shadow. The darkness will hide you, but only if you embrace it fully." Izuku was tasked with navigating Tartarus unnoticed. Guards patrolled the halls, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. Izuku had to slip past them without being seen, relying solely on his instincts and his understanding of the shadows. At first, he struggled. The guards were well trained, their movements precise. But with each attempt, Izuku grew more adept. He learned to anticipate their patterns, to blend into the darkness as if he were a part of it. By the end of the exercise, Izuku could move through the prison like a ghost, his presence undetectable even to the most vigilant guard. Lesson 4. The killer's resolve. The final lesson was the most brutal. Stain brought in a prisoner, a man known for his cruelty and violence. "This is your test," Stain said, handing Izuku a knife. "Kill him." The man sneered, his confidence evident as he sized up the young boy. But Izuku didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, his movements calm and deliberate. The fight was short. Izuku's training had made him efficient, his strikes precise. The prisoner didn't stand a chance. When it was over, Izuku stood over the man's lifeless body, the knife dripping with blood. His expression was cold, emotionless. Stain nodded in approval. "You didn't hesitate. You didn't falter. You've embraced the darkness, Midoriya. You're ready." The transformation complete by the end of the training, Izuku was no longer the boy who had entered Tartarus. He was something else entirely, a weapon forged in shadows, tempered by pain, and sharpened by resolve. As he stood in the dim light of the prison, his green hair casting eerie reflections on the walls, Izuku's voice broke the silence. "I understand now," he said, his tone as cold as ice. "The darkness isn't my enemy. It's my ally. And I will use it to create a world where the weak no longer suffer." Stain watched him with a mixture of pride and unease. "You've embraced it, Midoriya. But remember, the darkness is a double-edged sword. Wield it wisely or it will consume you." Izuku's eyes, devoid of warmth, met Stain's. "It won't consume me. I am the darkness." And with that, the boy who once dreamed of being a hero stepped fully into the shadows, his transformation complete. The final trial months of relentless training had honed Izuku Midoriya into something entirely unrecognizable. His once hopeful emerald eyes were now cold, calculating, and emotionless. Every muscle in his body, every thought in his mind, had been sculpted for one purpose: to kill without hesitation, to move with purpose, and to live in the shadows. Stain observed him with a mix of pride and somber understanding. This was the last day. The culmination of all the lessons, the trials, and the pain. Stain would now test Izuku to see if the boy had truly become what he needed to survive in the world. Stain's final words. The training room, a hollowed-out section of Tartarus untouched by light, had become their arena. Stain stood on one side, armed with his red blades. Izuku stood on the other, empty-handed. "This is your final trial," Stain said, his voice steady. "You've learned everything I could teach you: how to kill, how to move unseen, how to think like a predator. But now, you must prove that you can surpass me. Today, you are not my student. You are my enemy." Izuku nodded, his expression unreadable. "And what happens if I win?" Stain smirked. "Then my work is done, and you are ready to walk your own path. And if I lose?" "You won't," Stain said simply. The duel without warning, Stain lunged forward, his blades slicing through the air with deadly precision. Izuku didn't flinch. He moved like a shadow, his body weaving through the attacks with effortless grace. Stain pressed harder, his strikes faster and more unpredictable, but Izuku was always one step ahead. Every feint, every move, every calculated movement was met with an equal and opposite reaction. "You've learned well," Stain growled, his voice laced with both frustration and pride. Izuku didn't respond. Words were unnecessary. His actions spoke for him. He closed the distance between them in a heartbeat, his hand darting out to disarm Stain with a brutal efficiency that left no room for error. The blade clattered to the ground, and Stain found himself pinned, Izuku's knee pressed against his chest, his own blade now at his throat. "It's over," Izuku said coldly. For a moment, there was silence. Then Stain let out the low chuckle. "Yes," he said, his voice filled with a strange satisfaction. "It is." Acknowledgement and farewell. Izuku stepped back, allowing Stain to rise. The older man dusted himself off, his smirk never faltering. "You've surpassed me, Midoriya," Stain said, sheathing his blade. "You've become more than a killer. You've become a force. And now, you no longer need me." Izuku's gaze remained steady. "What now?" "Now, you walk your own path," 𝗧𝗵 replied. But remember this, the darkness you've embraced will always demand something in return. Stay true to your purpose or it will consume you. Izuku nodded. I won't falter. I know you won't, 𝗧𝗵 said. That's why I chose you. Walking out of the shadows as 𝗧𝗵 turned to leave, Izuku stood alone in the dim light, his mind racing with possibilities. The boy who once dreamed of being a hero was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous. 𝗧𝗵's parting words echoed in his mind. The world doesn't need another hero. It needs someone who can do what they can't. Someone like you. For the first time in months, Izuku allowed himself a small, bitter smile. His training was complete. The world had no idea what was coming. Few days later, as we see two guys in guard uniforms, it was disguise one gun was black hair man with eyes like black scara and white pupils, and other is a blonde guy with glasses as he looks Korean by appearance. Gun and Goo Kim stood at the entrance to Tartarus, the infamous prison housing the world's deadliest criminals. The dim lighting reflected off their sharp features, with Goo Kim casually adjusting the sword strapped to his back while Gun strode forward with an air of authority. Both exuded an aura of confidence, bordering on arrogance, as they made their way toward the core of the prison. Their target was the so-called King of Tartarus. The rumors painted him as a young man who had single-handedly subdued hundreds of villains within the prison, carving out his throne from chaos and fear. Gun was intrigued, not just by the title but by the idea of testing this supposed king. As they walked into the cell block, the sight before them was both intimidating and surreal. Izuku Midoriya sat atop a pile of unconscious or groaning villains, their defeated forms sprawled around the floor. His posture was relaxed, but his piercing green eyes were devoid of emotion, staring coldly at the two newcomers. Despite the chaos around him, his presence radiated calm depths, as though he was utterly untouchable. So, you two must be the new guards, Midoriya said, his voice low and indifferent. He tilted his head slightly, the faintest smirk curling at the corner of his lips. I hope you're better than the last ones. Let's just say they didn't last long. Gun smirked at the challenge. I didn't come here to guard you, kid. I came to see if you're worth my time. He cracked his knuckles, stepping closer. You're the so-called King of Tartarus. Let's see if you live up to the name. Goo chuckled from behind, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. Gun, you sure this is worth it? He looked scrawny. But I guess looks can be deceiving. Midoriya didn't respond immediately. Instead, he shifted his position slightly, his gaze never leaving Gun. You talk too much, he said flatly. If you want to test me, go ahead. But don't hold back. I don't want to be disappointed. Gun's smirk widened as he lunged forward without hesitation, aiming a powerful punch at Midoriya's chest. The blow connected, but instead of the satisfying sound of impact, Gun felt a jarring resistance. It was as though he had struck solid steel. Midoriya didn't even flinch. Gun muttered, shaking his hand as though testing his knuckles. Not bad. Your body's tougher than I thought. Is that all? Midoriya asked coldly, rising to his feet in one fluid motion. His movements were unhurried, but there was an unmistakable menace in the way he carried himself. Goo stepped forward, drawing his sword in a smooth, practiced motion. The blade gleamed under the dim light as he pointed it at Midoriya. Let me try, he said, his voice filled with amusement. If your bones are as tough as they say, let's see how they hold up against this. He slashed at Midoriya, the blade moving with deadly precision. But as the sword made contact with Midoriya's forearm, it stopped abruptly, sparks flying from the impact. Goo stared at the blade in disbelief. It hadn't even scratched him. Impossible, Goo muttered, pulling back and inspecting his weapon. The edge was slightly chipped. What the hell are you made of? Midoriya glanced at the faint mark on his arm, then back at Goo. You'll need more than that to hurt me, he said, his tone as emotionless as ever. Gun stepped in again, this time aiming a series of rapid punches at Midoriya's torso. Each strike was powerful enough to shatter concrete, but Midoriya absorbed them all without budging. He countered with a swift elbow strike to Gun's ribs, sending the larger man skidding back several feet. You're strong, Gun admitted, his tone laced with genuine respect. He wiped a bit of blood from the corner of his mouth and grinned. But strength alone doesn't make you a king. Midoriya stepped forward, his cold eyes locking onto Gun's. I don't care about being a king, he said. I care about surviving. And if you think you can teach me something useful, prove it. Gun's grin widened. Oh, I like you, kid. You've got potential. But if you want my training, you're going to have to earn it. Goo sheathed his sword, his earlier arrogance replaced with curiosity. Looks like we've got our work cut out for us, he said. This kid's tougher than he looks. Midoriya smirked faintly, the first hint of emotion breaking through his cold exterior. If you think you can push me harder than I've already been pushed, you're welcome to try. But don't waste my time. Gun chuckled, the sound low and dangerous. Oh, trust me. You won't regret this. The three of them stood in the dimly lit cell block, the air thick with tension and anticipation. The king of Tartarus had found new challengers, and perhaps new mentors. As Shogun looking at him as he said, well, Izuku Midoriya, you are going to be my greatest masterpiece. Gun leaned against a beam in the expansive underground training hall, his piercing eyes never leaving Midoriya. The air was heavy with the sound of fists smashing into metal, solid, relentless, and unyielding. A battered old refrigerator, its surface marred with deep dents and scratches, stood as Midoriya's opponent for the day. His bloodied knuckles struck with unwavering rhythm, each impact reverberating through the hall. Pain is the best teacher, Gun remarked, his tone a mix of amusement and challenge. It either breaks you or makes you unshakable. Right now, I need to know what kind of man you are, kid. Midoriya didn't respond, his focus razor-sharp. His breathing was labored, his muscles screamed for rest, but his mind refused to waver. With an almost mechanical precision, he raised his fist again and drove it into the twisted metal. Goo, sitting casually on a stack of mats nearby, twirled a wooden sword in his hands as he watched. You know, Gun, he said with a smirk, at this rate, the fridge might hold up better than the kid. Gun glanced at Goo with a faint chuckle. If he falls apart, he wasn't worth the effort. But if he keeps going, he returned his gaze to Midoriya, whose strikes only grew fiercer. He'll become a masterpiece. The first few weeks were nothing short of hell. Gun's training philosophy was brutal, shatter the limits of the body and mind to forge something unbreakable. Strength isn't given, Gun told Midoriya on the first day. It's earned. And the price is everything you think you have. Morning sessions began with grueling endurance exercises. Midoriya was made to carry heavy chains wrapped around his torso, dragging massive tires across uneven terrain. Gun insisted on uphill sprints, each run punctuated by Midoriya collapsing from exhaustion, only for Gun to bark orders for him to get back up. Your body is a tool, Gun said, walking alongside him during one particularly brutal drill. And tools are useless if they break under pressure. Harden it. Make it unyielding. Midoriya gritted his teeth, hauling himself to his feet despite the weight pulling him down. His cold, focused expression didn't falter. By the third week, Gun introduced wall climbs with nothing but bare hands, punishing Midoriya for every slip or hesitation. His palms were raw and bleeding, but he didn't stop. Goo often watched from the sidelines, occasionally tossing in snide remarks. You're really pushing him, Gun. You sure he won't break? Gun didn't bother to respond, his attention fixed on Midoriya. He's not the type to break. He'll adapt or die trying. When Gun deemed Midoriya's physical foundation strong enough, the focus shifted to technique. Each day brought the introduction of a new martial art, and each night was spent drilling it into perfection. This is Kyokushin karate, Gun explained one day, his stance low and powerful. With a single devastating low kick, he sent a training dummy skidding across the floor. It's all about brute force. Every strike must be a knockout. Midoriya imitated the move, his kick slamming into the dummy with impressive force. The dummy quivered but didn't topple. Not bad, Gun said, stepping forward. But your balance is off. Again. 4 hours, Midoriya practiced under Gun's scrutinizing eye. The faintest mistake was met with immediate correction. And when the sun rose the next day, they moved on to the next art. Shotokan karate, judo, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai, and more, all were drilled into Midoriya with relentless precision. Most people spend years mastering just one of these, Goo remarked, watching Midoriya execute a flawless combination of strikes and grapples. But he's different. It's like he's downloading them into his brain. Gun's gaze remained locked on Midoriya, his expression unreadable. He's not just learning, he said quietly. He's evolving. All the martial arts he learned by copying Gun and perfecting it Aikido, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, like normal jiu-jitsu, judo jiu-jitsu, karate Kyokushin, karate Shotokan, karate Goju-ryu, karate Isshin-ryu, karate Shito-ryu, karate Shorin-ryu, and karate Wado-ryu, kickboxing, boxing, kung fu, Muay Thai, Sambo, sumo, MMA mixed martial arts, taekwondo, sistema, lucha libre, Kali Eskrima/Eskrima, and Tai Chi. But martial arts alone weren't enough. Gun designed a regimen of extreme strength and endurance training to push Midoriya beyond human limits. Punch through the steel, Gun ordered one day, pointing to a reinforced steel slab set up in the training hall. Midoriya's knuckles were already raw, but he didn't hesitate. He struck the steel with all his might, the impact sending a painful shock up his arm. Again, Gun said, his voice cold. The first cracks appeared after the 10th punch. By the 20th, the steel began to bend. That's it, Gun said, a faint smirk on his lips. Pain is temporary. Power is forever. Each task was more punishing than the last. One day, Midoriya was made to lift boulders. The next, he was tasked with running laps around the hall while dragging a sled loaded with weights. And always, Gun's voice pushed him further. Everything in life fights back, Gun said during one particularly grueling session. If you want to win, you have to hit harder, move faster, and endure longer. There are no shortcuts. Midoriya's body screamed for mercy, but his mind was a fortress. His cold, focused determination never wavered. On the last day of training, Gun and Goo stood in the center of the hall, their postures relaxed but their eyes sharp. This is it, Gun said, his tone heavy with anticipation. Everything you've learned, everything you've endured, it's time to show me what you've become. Midoriya stepped forward, his expression as icy and unreadable as ever. Without warning, he launched himself at Gun with explosive speed. Gun blocked the first strike, but the sheer force of it pushed him back a step. Midoriya's movements were a terrifying blend of every style he had learned, brutal, precise, and unrelenting. You're holding back, Gun said, parrying a rapid series of punches. Stop treating me like I'm fragile. Midoriya's next attack was faster, his strikes flowing seamlessly from one technique to the next. A feint with his left hand, followed by a devastating spinning kick, caught Gun off guard. The impact sent him stumbling, and before he could recover, Midoriya delivered a perfectly timed sweep that knocked him to the ground. Gun lay there for a moment, breathing heavily. Then, to Goo's astonishment, he laughed, a deep, satisfied laugh that echoed through the hall. You did it, Gun said, climbing to his feet. You're not just my student anymore. You're my greatest work. My masterpiece. Midoriya stood silently, his cold eyes locked on Gun. Goo smirked from the sidelines, shaking his head. Guess you're out of a job, Gun, he teased. Gun's grin widened. Not a chance. There's always more to learn. But for now, he stepped closer to Midoriya, clapping a hand on his shoulder. You're ready for whatever comes next. Midoriya's lips curled into the faintest smirk, his icy demeanor unshaken. I was born ready. Midoriya walked out of the training hall that day a different man. Hardened, unyielding, and armed with skills that would make him a force of nature. Behind him, Gun and Goo watched with a mixture of pride and awe. What have we unleashed? Goo muttered. Gun's smirk returned. Not what? And the world isn't ready for him. Afterwards, Midoriya stood in front of the mirror, his reflection almost unrecognizable. Midoriya stood in front of the mirror, his reflection almost unrecognizable. The face staring back at him was sharp, chiseled, and utterly intimidating. His jet-black hair now had an untamed yet refined look, and his piercing eyes held a depth that was both commanding and eerie. His physique was now the embodiment of discipline and strength, honed from the brutal training Gun had subjected him to. He slowly flexed his fingers, the scars from his past life barely visible on his skin. The voice that escaped his lips was no longer the timid tone of a boy striving to prove himself. It was deep, calm, and calculated, reminiscent of Sung Jinhwa's measured cadence. Gun stood beside him, arms crossed, a satisfied smirk playing on his lips. "I told you, didn't I? The old you needed to die. What you see now, this is my masterpiece." He gestured toward Midoriya with a slight nod. "You're no longer a symbol of weakness. You're the predator in a world of prey." Midoriya turned his gaze toward Gun, his new voice resonating through the room. "This transformation. It's not just the appearance, is it? You've made sure I have no choice but to embrace what comes next." Gun's smirk deepened. "Exactly. A new face, a new voice, and the strength to match. No one will recognize you, not even those who thought they knew you best. But more importantly, no one will dare stand against you." Midoriya nodded slowly, his expression cold, unreadable. "And the doctor?" Gun chuckled. "He did an excellent job. You might want to thank him, if you can find him. He prefers to disappear after making his miracles." Midoriya's lips curled into a faint, dark smile. "I have no need for gratitude. This is a means to an end. Nothing more." Gun clapped a hand on Midoriya's shoulder, the force of it almost knocking the air out of the room. "That's what I like to hear. You're no longer Izuku Midoriya, the boy who couldn't fight back. From today, you're the king of predators. A man forged in blood and discipline." The scene shifted as Midoriya stepped outside the training compound for the first time since his transformation. The air felt different, colder. The eyes of everyone around him lingered on his new form, their awe and fear evident. Gun leaned against the doorway, watching as Midoriya began to adapt to his surroundings. As Midoriya strode forward, a group of recruits training nearby froze, their gazes following his every move. One of them whispered, "Is that the guy Gun's been working on? He doesn't even look human anymore." Gun overheard the comment and grinned. "Human? He's beyond that now." Midoriya's voice broke through the murmurs, silencing everyone instantly. "The whispers won't help you survive. Focus on yourselves, or you'll crumble under the weight of mediocrity." The recruits quickly returned to their training, their faces pale. Gun laughed softly, muttering to himself, "Yeah, he's going to be something else." Later that evening, Midoriya stood alone in the shadows of the compound. His reflection in a broken window stared back at him, the moonlight accentuating every sharp angle of his new visage. The voice that came from his lips, deep and commanding, echoed in the silence. "This face, this voice, this strength, all tools for what's to come. The weak must be reminded of their place. And I'll be the one to remind them." From the shadows, Gun's voice interrupted his thoughts. "And what will you do with this power, Midoriya?" Midoriya didn't turn to face him. "What I was always meant to do. Become the nightmare they fear and the shadow they can't escape." Gun chuckled. "Good. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Welcome to the new you." Afterwards, in a tight security room, as All-for-One's trembling hand hovered over Midoriya, the atmosphere grew heavy with a palpable energy. Izuku's sharp, determined gaze pierced through the dimly lit chamber. His eyes, once a vibrant green filled with youthful hope, had now transformed, reflecting the darkness he had embraced. The sclera of his eyes had turned an inky black, while his pupils shone a stark, almost ethereal white, radiating an unsettling aura of power. The tendrils of All-for-One's power coiled like serpents, reaching into Midoriya's core. His body trembled as the quirks poured into him, one after another, an overwhelming torrent of strength, memories, and raw potential. Pain rippled through his frame, his muscles convulsing as his mind raced to accommodate the sheer magnitude of the transfer. And yet, amidst the chaos within him, his expression remained eerily calm, a sinister smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Midoriya's voice, deeper and colder than ever, echoed in the chamber. "So, this is it. The culmination of your power, your legacy, and your ambition now mine. 𝗵𝗃 chuckled weakly, his body visibly drained from the process. Yes, Izuku. Feel it. The power to reshape the world, to dominate and destroy as you see fit. How does it feel, my heir? Izuku raised a hand, flexing his fingers as a dark, crackling energy surrounded them. His black sclera and glowing white pupils seemed to pierce through the very fabric of the room. It feels liberating, he muttered, his voice carrying an edge of restrained fury and dark excitement. For the first time, I'm not bound by anyone's expectations. Not by heroes, not by society, not even by you. 𝗵𝗃 smirked faintly. But that's the mindset of a ruler. Midoriya's grin widened, but there was no warmth in it, only the cold confidence of someone who had finally grasped the destiny he believed he was meant for. He turned away from the weakened figure of 𝗵𝗃, his steps echoing as he began walking toward the exit. As he pushed the heavy doors open, the cool night air greeted him. He paused, gazing up at the sky with his unsettling new eyes. They reflected the moonlight, their eerie glow a testament to the transformation he had undergone. This power, he whispered, his voice low and menacing, isn't just for destruction. It's for creation, for reshaping this broken world into one where strength and ambition reign supreme. Memories of his past flashed through his mind. The ridicule, the rejection, the countless nights spent yearning for recognition. Those memories didn't hurt anymore, they fueled him. They were the foundation of his resolve. No more weakness, he muttered, clenching his fists. No more hypocrisy. The heroes and their flawed ideals, they'll all fall. I'll show them what true power looks like. His mind raced with plans. He thought of the quirks now residing within him, each one a piece of the arsenal he would use to obliterate the old world. First, I'll add them, he said aloud, his tone sharp with determination. I'll push each one to its limits and make them mine. Then, I'll tear apart their symbols of hope, starting with you. Hi. The age of false peace is over. He smirked, the black sclera of his eyes making the glow of his white pupils all the more striking in the shadows. They'll see me coming, but they won't be able to stop me. Not the heroes, not the villains, not anyone. For a moment, the streets were silent, save for the sound of his steady footsteps. The city slept, unaware of the storm that had just been unleashed. Izuku Midoriya, reborn as a harbinger of change, disappeared into the darkness, his plans etched clearly in his mind. The world will kneel, he murmured to himself, his voice dripping with quiet menace. Not because they fear me, but because they'll have no choice. As the surge of power finally settled within him, Izuku stood alone in the vast training room 𝗵𝗃 had prepared for him. The air was thick with the residue of energy from the quirk transfer, and his body still pulsed with raw, unrefined power. He exhaled slowly, his breath visible in the cool air, as his glowing white pupils scanned the room, his black sclera making them appear even more haunting. Time to see what I've inherited, he muttered to himself, rolling his shoulders as he stretched his arms, feeling the latent energy simmering beneath his skin. A single wave of his hand created a faint distortion in the air, a testament to the power coursing through him. He closed his eyes briefly, focusing on the vast ocean of quirks within him, categorizing them, analyzing their potential, and feeling their essence. Opening his eyes, a sinister grin spread across his face. So many tools, so much potential. Let's organize this chaos. He conjured a notebook from nearby, a habit he hadn't yet abandoned, and began listing the quirks, testing them briefly to understand their capabilities. Each entry was accompanied by a sharp whisper, his voice carrying equal parts amazement and intent. Midoriya's list of 𝗵𝗃's quirks: decay, the ability to disintegrate anything he touches. So this is Shigaraki's infamous quirk. Absolute destruction at my fingertips. Super regeneration, rapid healing that allows his body to recover from almost any injury. A second chance in every fight. Perfect. Air cannon, the ability to release devastating blasts of compressed air. Perfect for long-range devastation. Warp gate, teleportation for himself and others over vast distances. Mobility and logistics secured. Hypertrophy, the ability to enlarge his muscles temporarily for enhanced strength. A simple, brutal solution. Search, a quirk that allows him to locate and analyze up to 100 people at once. Knowledge is power, and now I have both. Infrared vision, the ability to see in the dark and through obstacles. No shadows can hide my enemies. Impact recoil, a quirk that returns the force of any attack to its origin. They'll break themselves before they break me. Blade arms, the ability to transform his arms into sharp, deadly blades. Swift, silent, and deadly. Barrier, the ability to create near-impenetrable shields of energy. Defense to complement my offense. Enhancer, a quirk that boosts his physical strength and agility exponentially. Raw power when finesse won't do. Shockwave emission, generates seismic energy capable of creating devastating shockwaves. Earth-shattering destruction at will. Black tendrils, tendrils of energy for mid to long-range combat. Versatile and efficient. Energy manipulation, the ability to manipulate ambient energy and turn it into powerful attacks. Limitless potential for creativity in combat. Quirk nullification, the power to nullify the quirks of others temporarily. When their power fails, mine will still stand. Voice amplification, a quirk that lets him create sonic attacks with his voice. For when subtlety isn't needed. Telekinesis, the ability to control objects with his mind. Effortless control of the battlefield. Fire generation, the ability to produce and control flames. Burn them to ash if need be. Ice manipulation, control over ice to create structures, weapons, or immobilize opponents. The perfect complement to fire. Electric discharge, the ability to release electricity in devastating bursts. Stunning and destructive. Density control, the ability to make objects or even himself heavier or lighter. A tactical advantage at all times. Mind reading, a quirk that allows him to read the surface thoughts of others. They can't fight what I know before they do. Fear inducement, the ability to project intense fear into others. Even the strongest crumble under terror. Gravity manipulation, control over gravitational forces. The battlefield bends to my will. Izuku paused, surveying the notebook and his annotations. His breathing had steadied, and his mind was clearer than it had ever been. The sheer number of quirks at his disposal wasn't just overwhelming, it was exhilarating. Each one was a key to unlocking his ultimate plans. He chuckled softly, his voice cold and commanding. With this arsenal, I'll reshape the world. Heroes, villains, even society itself, none of them are ready for me. Closing the notebook, he stared at his reflection in the darkened glass of the training room, his black 𝗧𝗪 and white pupils glowing faintly in the dim light. This was no longer the boy who once idolized heroes. This was someone else entirely, a harbinger of change and power beyond comprehension. This isn't just about strength, he whispered, his grin widening. It's about control. And I will control everything. The cold, oppressive silence of the maximum security prison was only broken by the sound of deliberate footsteps echoing through the dimly lit hallway. The guards stationed nearby barely spared a glance as the tall figure passed them, their faces pale and fearful. Izuku Midoriya, clad in a dark coat that billowed behind him, his black 𝗧𝗪 and glowing white pupils cutting through the gloom, moved forward with an air of absolute authority. As he reached the end of the hallway, he stopped in front of a thick steel door, its surface scratched and dented, a testament to the occupants' futile attempts at freedom. Overhaul, Chisaki Kai, sat hunched inside, his once pristine suit tattered, his hands gone as he stared at the floor. The man who once terrorized so many now looked small and broken. The sound of the lock clicking open made Chisaki look up, his eyes widening in shock. Standing before him was a figure he barely recognized. Izuku's face was unreadable, but his glowing eyes carried an intensity that sent a shiver down Chisaki's spine. Midoriya. Chisaki croaked, his voice hoarse from disuse. What are you doing here? Izuku stepped into the cell, the door slamming shut behind him. He said nothing at first, letting the oppressive silence weigh down on Chisaki. Finally he spoke, his voice cold and detached. I'm here to take something from you, Overhaul. Something you don't deserve to have. Chisaki's confusion quickly turned to anger as he shot to his feet. You think you can walk in here and threaten me? Do you know who I am? What I've done? Izuku didn't respond with words. Instead, his hand shot forward, gripping Chisaki by the throat and slamming him into the wall with enough force to crack the concrete. Chisaki gasped, gasping at Izuku's hand, but it was like trying to move a steel vise. I know exactly who you are, Izuku said, his voice low and dangerous. You're the man who destroyed lives without a second thought. You think you're powerful, but you're nothing compared to me. His grip tightened, and Chisaki's struggles grew weaker. Without warning, Izuku released him, letting him crumple to the floor in a coughing heap. Chisaki barely had time to catch his breath before Izuku kicked him hard in the ribs, sending him sprawling. He landed with a groan, clutching his side, but Izuku wasn't done. He grabbed Chisaki by the collar, lifting him off the ground effortlessly. You took away her freedom, Izuku growled, his mind flashing back to Eri and the horrors she endured. You turned her life into a nightmare. This is the least you deserve. The beating that followed was brutal and unrelenting. Izuku didn't hold back, each punch and kick carrying the weight of his fury. Blood splattered against the walls and floor, Chisaki's cries of pain echoing through the cell. By the time Izuku stepped back, his breathing even and steady, Chisaki was barely conscious, slumped against the wall. But Izuku wasn't finished. He knelt beside Chisaki, placing a hand on his chest. A dark, ominous aura began to emanate from Izuku as he activated his newly acquired power. Chisaki's body convulsed as Izuku's hand glowed, the quirk Overhaul being forcibly extracted from him. When it was over, Chisaki collapsed to the floor, his body limp and his eyes hollow. Izuku stood, flexing his fingers as he felt the power coursing through him. This quirk it's wasted on you, he said, his voice cold. I'll use it for something greater than your twisted ideals. He turned and walked toward the door, pausing only briefly to glance back at Chisaki, who now sat slumped and broken in the corner of his cell, his once imposing presence reduced to nothing. Sit here and rot, Izuku said, his tone devoid of sympathy. It's more mercy than you deserve. The door slammed shut behind him, and as Izuku's footsteps faded down the hall, Chisaki was left alone in the darkness, his body battered, his quirk stolen, and his spirit utterly crushed. In Muscular prison room the clash was inevitable. Muscular had long been a lingering stain on Izuku's memory, their first battle serving as a painful reminder of his limitations. Now, Midoriya returned, a completely different person, stronger, colder, and more calculating. As the door to Muscular's cell opened, the hulking brute grinned, his eyes lighting up with twisted glee. Deku. Oh, I've been waiting for this. Ready for round 2. Izuku stepped inside, his gaze calm but icy. This isn't a round, Muscular. It's the final act. Muscular lunged, his body already bulging with his quirk's power, but Izuku was faster. Effortlessly sidestepping the attack, Izuku delivered a devastating kick to Muscular's ribs, sending him crashing into the wall. You're still just a brute with no strategy, Izuku said, his voice low. But I'm not the same as I was back then. The battle was over almost as soon as it began. Izuku dismantled Muscular with precision, every punch and kick calculated to inflict maximum damage. The air crackled with dark energy as Izuku activated his quirk-stealing ability, placing his hand over Muscular's chest. The hulking man screamed as his power was ripped away from him, his once mighty frame now limp and powerless. As Muscular lay motionless on the floor, Izuku looked down at him with a mixture of contempt and closure. This is for Kota, he muttered, turning and leaving without another word. Next day the clanging of metal doors echoed through Tartarus as Midoriya entered the dimly lit containment block. His imposing presence was enough to silence even the rowdiest prisoners, his black sclera and white pupils glowing faintly in the darkness. Each step he took was deliberate, exuding authority as the self-proclaimed king of Tartarus. In one of the cells sat 𝗬𝗪𝗎, a former martial artist known for his chaotic disdain for the hero system. In one of the cells sat 𝗬𝗪𝗎, a former martial artist known for his chaotic disdain for the hero system. Despite the dire atmosphere of the prison, Todo expression was casual, almost jovial, as he leaned back against the wall with his legs crossed. When he spotted Midoriya, his grin widened. "So, you're the so-called king everyone talks about," Todo said, his voice booming through the cell. "You've got a reputation, I'll give you that. But tell me, before we get to anything serious," he stood, cracking his knuckles, his eyes gleaming with intrigue. "What kind of girls do you like?" Midoriya raised an eyebrow at the unexpected question, momentarily thrown off by the absurdity of it. He had been prepared for a fight, not a personal inquiry. Then his mind flickered back to one of the earlier cells he had visited, where he had beaten a particularly annoying prisoner into 𝗵𝘃𝗵𝗃. On the floor of that cell, he had noticed a photo, a picture of a woman. The woman had caught his attention. She was tall, with a striking physique, a confident pose in a bikini, and notably, a large, shapely figure. It wasn't a detail that normally stayed in his mind, but Todo's strange question had brought it back. Midoriya's voice was cold and detached, but there was a trace of amusement in his tone as he answered, "Tall. Confident. With a big butt." There was a beat of silence before Todo burst out laughing, clapping his hands together. "Ha! A man of culture, I see," he roared. "I knew I'd like you. You've got good taste, King." Midoriya's expression didn't change, though he crossed his arms and leaned slightly against the wall. "Are we done with the small talk, or do you have more questions about my preferences?" Todo wiped a tear from his eye, still chuckling. All right. Straight to business, huh. I respect that. But you've intrigued me, Midoriya. A man who knows what he likes and isn't afraid to fight for it. Let's see if you're as strong as they say." Without warning, Todo launched himself at Midoriya, his massive frame moving with surprising speed. Midoriya anticipated the attack and sidestepped, his body reacting with calculated precision. Todo spun on his heel, aiming a powerful punch at Midoriya's ribs. The impact echoed through the corridor, but Midoriya barely flinched. "Not bad," Midoriya said, grabbing Todo's arm mid-swing and twisting it. "But strength alone won't get you anywhere." Todo grinned through the pain, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "Good. Show me what you've got." He clapped his hands together, activating his quirk, Boogie Woogie. In an instant, their positions swapped, leaving Todo standing where Midoriya had been a second ago. Midoriya didn't hesitate. He had already studied Todo's ability and predicted the move. He lunged forward, his fist colliding with Todo's chest before the larger man could react. The force of the blow sent Todo skidding back, but he remained standing, laughing through gritted teeth. "You're no joke, King," Todo admitted, rubbing his chest. "It's been a while since I had a real challenge." Midoriya tilted his head, his gaze piercing. "You're strong, Todo. But strength means nothing without purpose. Why do you fight?" Todo's laughter softened, replaced by a serious expression. "Because I hate this system. Heroes, villains, it's all a sham. They don't care about people like us. But you're different. I can see it in your eyes." Midoriya nodded, a rare flicker of approval in his cold demeanor. "Then fight with me, not against me. Together, we'll create a world where strength and conviction reign supreme." Todo smirked, clapping his hands together once more. This time, it wasn't to attack. "You've got a deal, King. Let's tear this system down." As the dust from their skirmish settled, Todo stood with a mix of exhilaration and exhaustion. His towering frame was covered in sweat, his breaths labored but steady. Midoriya, however, appeared almost untouched, his cold and calculating demeanor as unshaken as ever. He stepped closer to Todo, his black scara and glowing white pupils locking onto Todo's gaze. Midoriya's voice, deep and commanding, carried a weight that silenced even the faintest echoes in the corridor. "You're strong, Todo. Stronger than most I've encountered in this place. But strength without direction is meaningless." Todo tilted his head, his ever-present grin returning. "So what's this about, King? You trying to recruit me or just here to show off?" Midoriya crossed his arms, his posture exuding authority. "I'm here to make an offer. I'm building something bigger than heroes and villains, bigger than this corrupt system we're trapped in. I need people like you by my side. People with strength, conviction, and a disdain for the lies we've been fed. Todo raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Go on. I want you to be my first commander, Midoriya continued. Out of the 10 people I'll choose to stand at my side, I want you to be the first. Together, we'll bring down this system and reshape the world into one where true power and vision reign supreme. There was a pause as Todo considered the offer. His gaze lingered on Midoriya, searching for any sign of deceit, but all he saw was a man with unwavering determination. Finally, a wide grin spread across Todo's face. You've got guts, King, Todo said, clapping his hands together once more. The sound echoed through the corridor, but this time, there was no use of his quirk. All right, I'll bite. But if I'm going to follow you, I need to know one thing. Midoriya's expression remained unreadable. What's that? Todo's eyes gleamed with a mix of seriousness and mischief as he asked, what kind of world are you trying to create? Midoriya's response was immediate, his voice cold but resolute. A world where strength is the only currency that matters. A world where those with power can truly shape their destiny. No lies, no hypocrisy, just raw truth. Todo let out a low chuckle. You've got a vision, I'll give you that. I'm in. But let's get one thing straight, I don't follow weaklings. You'll have to keep proving you're worthy of being called king. Midoriya nodded, the faintest smirk playing at the corner of his lips. You'll find no weakness in me, Todo. Welcome to the start of something unstoppable. Aftermath with Todo Aoi as his first commander, Midoriya's ambitions began to take shape. Todo's loyalty and raw power made him a formidable ally, and his unrelenting spirit ensured that he never backed down from a challenge. Together, they started laying the groundwork for a new era, one forged in strength, ambition, and the longing to shatter the chains of a broken system. The Tartarus gym was dimly lit, a sanctuary for the restless souls trapped within its walls. The clang of weights and the low hum of machines filled the air as Midoriya stood shirtless, his lean yet muscular physique glistening with sweat. His movements were precise, controlled, and methodical as he lifted a stack of weights far heavier than anyone in Tartarus dared to attempt. His black 𝗧𝗪 and glowing white pupils gleamed ominously in the faint light. This wasn't mere training for Midoriya, it was preparation for the war he intended to wage. The sound of approaching footsteps broke his focus. He lowered the weights with a metallic clang, turning his head slightly. A woman stepped into view, her presence commanding and sharp. She had an air of deadly precision, her eyes cold yet assessing. Lady Nagant, Midoriya said flatly, recognizing her immediately. To what do I owe this visit? Nagant crossed her arms, leaning casually against a nearby pillar. I've been watching you, King of Tartarus. It's hard not to, considering the chaos you've stirred up around here. Midoriya stood, unfazed by her scrutiny. If you're here to challenge me, I suggest you think twice. I've no interest in pointless fights. A small smirk played on Nagant's lips. Relax, kid. I'm not here to fight you. In fact, I'm curious. You've been tearing through this place like a storm, taking quirks, building alliances. What's your endgame? Midoriya's eyes narrowed, and his voice turned cold and measured. To burn the current system to the ground and rebuild it in my image. This world is broken, and I'm the only one with the strength to fix it. Nagant chuckled softly. Big words for someone so young. But I can see it in your eyes. You mean every word. You remind me of myself before everything. Midoriya tilted his head slightly. And yet you're here. What do you want? Nagant stepped closer, her gaze locking onto his. I've seen how corrupt the hero system is firsthand. I've been a pawn in their games, and I've killed in their name. But you're different. You're not hiding behind a mask of righteousness. You're honest about what you want, and I can respect that. So, Midoriya asked, his tone still cold. So, Nagant continued, I want in. You're going to need more than brute force and stolen quirks to take on the world. You'll need strategy, precision, and someone who knows how to navigate the system you're trying to destroy. Midoriya studied her for a moment, his piercing gaze analyzing every word, every movement. You want to join me? Nagant nodded. I do. But let's be clear. I'm not here to follow blindly. I'll fight by your side as long as your vision aligns with my own. The moment it doesn't, I won't hesitate to put a bullet between your eyes. A rare smirk appeared on Midoriya's face. Fair enough. But you should know, Lady Nagant, if you ever aim that rifle at me, you won't get the chance to fire. Nagant smiled, a hint of amusement in her expression. I'd expect nothing less. Aftermath with Lady Nagant joining his ranks, Midoriya gained more than just another ally. He gained a strategist, an assassin, and someone who understood the flaws of the hero system from the inside out. Their alliance marked another step forward in his journey to reshape the world, each new recruit solidifying his path as the king of Tartarus. Meeting the lawyer Midoriya was sitting in his cell, sharpening his skills with a metal bar he'd bent into a makeshift training tool. The usual hum of Tartarus felt distant, his focus unshaken. Then came the sound of a guard's keys jangling, followed by a polite knock on the metal bars, a rare formality in a place like this. Midoriya, the guard said, his voice tinged with unease, you have a visitor. A lawyer. Midoriya's glowing white pupils shifted to the guard. A lawyer, he asked, his tone flat but with a flicker of intrigue. Yes. Says he's here on behalf of all for one. Midoriya stood slowly, his movements deliberate and measured. Take me to him. The meeting room was stark and sterile, a table and 2 chairs the only furniture present. Sitting in one of the chairs was a sharply dressed man in a tailored black suit, his hair slicked back and his demeanor calm yet imposing. A briefcase rested on the table in front of him. Midoriya entered, his gaze locking onto the man. The lawyer rose, offering a hand. Izuku Midoriya, I presume. Midoriya ignored the handshake, taking a seat instead. You're all for one's lawyer. What do you want? The man smirked slightly, sitting down and opening the briefcase. Not what I want, Mr. Midoriya. What your father wanted. My name is Kazuki Mori. I've been Mr. Shigaraki's, your father's, legal representative for years. And now, I am here to fulfill his last wishes. Midoriya leaned back, his expression unreadable. Go on. Kazuki slid a stack of documents across the table. Your father anticipated his eventual removal from the picture. As such, he arranged for all his remaining assets, both tangible and intangible, to be transferred to you. Midoriya raised an eyebrow. All his assets. Yes, Kazuki confirmed, adjusting his glasses. His wealth, properties, hidden vaults, resources, and more importantly, his networks. These documents outline everything. Bank accounts, safe houses, access codes, and a comprehensive list of his associates. It's all yours now. Midoriya's eyes flickered with a hint of interest. And what's the catch? Kazuki smiled. No catch. He believed in you, Mr. Midoriya. He believed you would carry on his legacy in ways even he couldn't. Consider this his parting gift. Midoriya glanced at the documents, then back at Kazuki. Are you part of this inheritance? I serve the heir to all for one, Kazuki replied smoothly. As long as you lead, I will assist. My expertise is at your disposal. Midoriya smirked faintly, the first sign of emotion breaking through his cold demeanor. Efficient. I like that. Anything else? Kazuki reached into the briefcase again, pulling out a sealed envelope. This is a personal letter from your father. He instructed me to give it to you directly. Midoriya took the envelope, staring at it for a moment before tucking it into his pocket. I'll read it later. Kazuki nodded. As you wish. One last thing. Your father mentioned that his legacy isn't just about power or wealth. He wanted you to surpass him in every way. To become more than just the king of Tartarus, but the ruler of a new era. Midoriya stood, gathering the documents. He'll get his wish. Now leave. Kazuki stood as well, bowing slightly. Of course. If you need me, you know how to reach me. As Kazuki Mori packed his briefcase to leave, Midoriya leaned forward in his chair, his black scara and glowing white pupils locking onto the lawyer with unsettling intensity. Wait, Midoriya said, his voice calm but commanding, stopping Kazuki in his tracks. Kazuki turned back. Yes, Mr. Midoriya. Midoriya steepled his fingers, his posture exuding control. "Before you go, tell me everything. What exactly have I acquired from my father? What types of people worked under him? And what kind of reach do his resources have, both here and outside the country?" Kazuki smiled faintly, sensing the sharp intellect behind the question. "Of course. Allow me to summarize." He opened the briefcase again, pulling out a smaller file filled with categorized information. "The inheritance breakdown," Kazuki began. "Your inheritance is vast and multifaceted, Mr. Midoriya. It spans across multiple areas, both conventional and unconventional. I'll start with the people. Mercenaries and operatives. Your father had contracts with some of the most dangerous individuals on the planet. This includes assassins, black ops specialists, and combat-trained mercenaries. Many of them owe their allegiance to the all-for-one name, and now to you. They can be summoned for missions or protection at your command. Quirk researchers and engineers. A division of scientists and engineers specialized in quirks and their augmentation. These individuals were responsible for creating devices and experiments to enhance quirks. Some were even working on quirk transfer and fusion before your father's capture. International syndicates. Your father maintained alliances with international criminal organizations. From the Yakuza in Japan to the 𝗵𝗲𝗍 in Russia, and even cartels in South America. These groups often relied on him for quirk-based weaponry or strategic planning. They respect power above all else, and they'll align with you if you show them your strength. Politicians and informants. Your father had a network of informants embedded in various government bodies and agencies worldwide. These individuals provide intelligence, cover-ups, and occasionally influence legislation to benefit his operations. They remain active, waiting for new instructions. Resources and holdings. Kazuki continued, flipping to another section of the file. Financial assets. Several offshore accounts containing billions in various currencies. These funds are clean and untraceable, ready for immediate use. Properties and safe houses. Dozens of properties across the globe, including mansions, safe houses, and underground bunkers. Each one is stocked with supplies and weaponry. Arms and technology. Caches of advanced weaponry and technology, both quirk-based and traditional. Your father invested heavily in experimental devices that could amplify or neutralize quirks. These are stored in secure locations. Quirk-destroying drugs and serums. He had a sizable supply of quirk-destroying bullets and experimental serums that can either suppress or enhance quirks. These were originally sourced from the 𝗧𝗵𝗲𝗺 but later produced independently by his researchers. International influence. Your father maintained influence in nations beyond Japan. In several war-torn regions, he operated as both a supplier and a power broker. These connections can be activated if you choose to expand your operations globally. Midoriya's reaction. Midoriya absorbed the information with an unnerving calmness. His mind worked rapidly, piecing together strategies and potential uses for every asset described. Mercenaries, researchers, syndicates, informants, he murmured, leaning back. A global empire waiting to be reclaimed. Kazuki nodded. Precisely. Your father believed in power consolidation, but he also believed in adaptability. These resources are tools. How you use them is up to you. Midoriya's white pupils narrowed. But, tell me, is there anyone among his network who doubts my position? Kazuki hesitated before replying. There may be some who require persuasion, but most are loyal to the all-for-one legacy. They'll fall in line once they see your strength. Midoriya smirked faintly. They'll see it soon enough. And the ones who doubt, I'll deal with them personally. Final inquiry. Before Kazuki could close the briefcase again, Midoriya asked one last question. These scientists and researchers, are they still active? Kazuki nodded. Most of them, yes. They've been working in secret facilities under strict orders to remain operational until contacted. Midoriya's tone grew colder. Good. Contact them. I'll need their expertise for the next phase of my plan. Kazuki tilted his head curiously. May I ask what that plan entails? Midoriya's gaze turned distant, his voice low but resolute. Revolution. A world where the strong dominate without the facade of heroism or laws. A kingdom forged by my hands, with no one above me. Kazuki smiled, closing his briefcase. Understood. I'll make the arrangements. As Kazuki turned to leave, Midoriya leaned back in his chair, his mind racing with possibilities. The king of Tartarus was no longer bound by the walls of his prison. He was already shaping the world outside it. Afterwards, the faint, dim light in Midoriya's Tartarus cell cast elongated shadows across the room. Seated at the center of his domain, he exuded an aura of absolute authority. His black sclera and white pupils gleamed ominously as he awaited the arrival of two individuals he had deemed essential to his plans, Lady Nagant and 𝗬𝗪𝗎𝗺. Moments later, the heavy door creaked open, and two figures stepped inside. Lady Nagant, her presence calm but commanding, leaned against the wall with her arms crossed. 𝗬𝗪𝗎𝗺, ever casual, sauntered in, his sharp eyes scanning the room before settling on Midoriya. "You called us king?" 𝗬𝗪𝗎 asked with his usual straightforward tone. Lady Nagant raised an eyebrow. "What's the urgency, Midoriya? You don't summon people unless it's something big." Midoriya smiled faintly, gesturing for them to sit. "It is big. That's why I need the two of you here." His voice, deep and resonant like Sung Jinwoo's, carried a weight that demanded attention. Nagant and 𝗬𝗪𝗎𝗺 exchanged glances before taking their places on the metal stools in front of him. Midoriya leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "In 2 to 4 days, I'm escaping Tartarus." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. 𝗬𝗪𝗎𝗺's eyebrows shot up, and he grinned. About time. Sitting around in this dump doesn't suit you, Midoriya." Lady Nagant, however, was more measured. "Escape from Tartarus? That's no small feat. You're talking about breaking out of the most secure prison in existence." Midoriya nodded. "Exactly. Which is why I've been preparing for this moment since the day I arrived. Every guard, every patrol route, every possible weak point, I've studied them all. I've also accounted for contingencies. This escape isn't a gamble, it's a certainty." Nagant's sharp gaze softened slightly, impressed by his resolve. "And you're telling us because?" Midoriya straightened, his white pupils locking onto her. "Because I need you both. Nagant, your precision and ability to cover me from a distance will be crucial. 𝗬𝗪𝗎𝗺, your strength and teleportation technique will make sure we outmaneuver anyone foolish enough to stand in our way." 𝗬𝗪𝗎𝗺 chuckled, leaning back. "So, you want me as your ace in the hole? Guess I can't say no to that. But tell me, Midoriya, how sure are you about this plan?" Midoriya smirked. "Sure enough that failure isn't an option. This isn't just about freedom, it's about taking the first step toward something greater." Nagant narrowed her eyes. "If you've thought this through, then I'm with you. But what's the endgame, Midoriya? Once we're out, what's next?" Midoriya's expression grew serious. "Once we're out, the real work begins. We gather allies, consolidate power, and tear down the farce that is the hero system. No more lies. No more hypocrisy. A world where strength determines everything." Nagant nodded slowly. "I see. And you've already decided who you want on your side." Midoriya's smirk returned. "I have 10 positions to fill. You two are the first." 𝗬𝗪𝗎𝗺 laughed heartily. "First Commander, I like the sound of that. But tell me, what makes us so special?" Midoriya's tone softened, but his words carried conviction. "Because you both understand what it means to live outside the system. You've seen the rot in society firsthand. And more importantly, you're strong enough to stand by my side." Nagant's lips curled into a faint smile. "Flattery won't get you everywhere, but it's a good start. All right, Midoriya, I'm in." 𝗬𝗪𝗎𝗺 grinned, standing up and cracking his knuckles. "You've got my fists, king. Let's break out of this cage and show the world what we're made of." Midoriya stood, his presence filling the room. "In 2 days, I'll give the signal. When the time comes, follow my lead. Until then, act normal and don't draw suspicion." Nagant pushed herself off the wall. "Understood. Just make sure your plan lives up to the hype." 𝗬𝗪𝗎𝗺 clapped a hand on Midoriya's shoulder. "Don't worry, king. We've got this." As the two left the cell, Midoriya sat back down, his mind racing with calculations. His eyes, dark as the void, shone with unrelenting determination. The king of Tartarus was about to claim his freedom, and the world would tremble in his wake. The dimly lit halls of Tartarus felt heavier than ever as Midoriya approached 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗁𝗧𝗏's cell. The once proud leader of the 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗁𝗧𝗏 now sat hunched in a corner, his disheveled hair hanging over his lifeless eyes. Time had stripped him of everything: his limbs, his status, his pride. Yet Midoriya saw an opportunity in his brokenness. Midoriya stood outside the reinforced glass, his black sclera and white pupils glowing faintly in the light. He tapped the barrier lightly, the sound echoing through the silent wing. 𝗧𝗍𝗃 stirred, his eyes narrowing as he recognized the figure before him. "What do you want, brat?" 𝗧𝗍𝗃 growled, his voice hoarse from disuse. Midoriya's lips curled into a faint, knowing smile. "I'm here to offer you something, 𝗧𝗍𝗃. A chance at redemption, or revenge, depending on how you see it." 𝗧𝗍𝗃 snorted bitterly. "Redemption? Revenge? Don't make me laugh. The heroes took everything from me. My family, my boss, my limbs. I've got nothing left." Midoriya's voice dropped, taking on a chilling, manipulative tone. "Nothing left? That's not what I heard. Didn't they tell you?" 𝗧𝗍𝗃 frowned, confusion flickering in his hollow eyes. "Tell me what?" Midoriya leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your old boss, he didn't make it. The heroes failed to save him. They left him to rot in his condition. He's gone, 𝗧𝗍𝗃." The words hit 𝗧𝗍𝗃 like a sledgehammer. His breath hitched, and his fists clenched tightly, despite his missing hands. "You're lying," he hissed, though his voice betrayed a flicker of doubt. Midoriya's expression remained calm, almost pitying. "Why would I lie? Think about it. If they couldn't save you, why would they bother with him? He was just another loose end to them." 𝗧𝗍𝗃's mind raced, the seeds of doubt and despair taking root. Memories of his boss, frail and bedridden, surfaced. He had placed everything on the line to protect the man, yet now, they let him die, 𝗧𝗍𝗃 muttered, his voice breaking. Midoriya nodded, his tone sympathetic. "They did. But I'm not here to gloat. I'm here to offer you a way to honor his memory. Help me escape, 𝗧𝗍𝗃. Together, we can bring this broken system to its knees." 𝗧𝗍𝗃 stared at him, the fire of hatred rekindling in his eyes. "And what do you get out of this?" Midoriya smirked, his black and white eyes gleaming. "Freedom. But more than that, a chance to reshape this world. Join me, and I promise you'll have the power to destroy the people who took everything from you." What 𝗧𝗍𝗃 didn't know, however, was that Midoriya had already planted a safeguard. During their interaction, he had subtly used one of his newly acquired quirks to place an explosive quirk deep within 𝗧𝗍𝗃's body. As Midoriya manipulated him further over the coming days, 𝗧𝗍𝗃 grew increasingly loyal, his hatred of the heroes outweighing his doubts. Midoriya played the role of a leader perfectly, feeding 𝗧𝗍𝗃's need for vengeance while ensuring he remained a pawn in the grander scheme. The plan was set into motion as Midoriya sat silently in his cell, his black sclera and white pupils radiating an eerie glow. Lady Nagant and Todo Aoi stood nearby, their eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and determination. The atmosphere was heavy with tension, the kind that signaled a pivotal moment. Midoriya's calm voice cut through the silence like a blade. "It's time. 𝗧𝗍𝗃 will be the distraction we need. Nagant, Todo, stay ready. Once the explosion happens, we move. Fast." Todo chuckled, cracking his knuckles. "You're a cold one, King. But I like it. Let's get this done." Nagant nodded, her gaze sharp. "What about 𝗧𝗍𝗃? Are you sure he'll take the bait?" Midoriya's lips curled into a faint, sinister smirk. "He already has. He thinks he's escaping to avenge his boss. He doesn't know he's already a pawn in my game." Deep within the labyrinthine halls of Tartarus, 𝗧𝗍𝗃 wandered near the walls of his cell, muttering to himself about revenge and restoration. But unknown to him, Midoriya had planted an explosive quirk within his body during their earlier encounter, set to detonate when triggered. As 𝗧𝗍𝗃 moved closer to the wall, Midoriya closed his eyes, focusing on the mental connection to the quirk. With a single thought, he commanded it to detonate. The explosion ripped through the air, shaking the entire prison. The walls of 𝗧𝗧𝗃𝗧𝗏's cell crumbled as smoke and debris filled the corridor. Alarms blared, guards shouting orders to contain the chaos. Midoriya opened his eyes, a cold satisfaction flickering within them. It's done. Let's go. With the guards distracted and the prison in disarray, Midoriya wasted no time. Using his telekinesis, he enveloped himself, Nagant, and Todo in an invisible field, lifting them effortlessly off the ground. Hold on, he instructed, his voice calm but commanding. As they soared through the air, the scene below was chaotic. Guards scrambled to contain the destruction 𝗧𝗧𝗃𝗧's explosion had caused. Oblivious to the trio flying just above them, Midoriya focused, extending his invisibility quirk to cloak their presence. Todo, gripping tightly to the telekinetic field, chuckled. 𝗵𝗵𝗃𝗁𝗍. You really know how to make an exit. Nagant, her sharp eyes scanning their surroundings, smirked. I'll admit this is impressive. You're more resourceful than I thought. Midoriya remained stoic, his gaze fixed ahead. This is just the beginning. We're not stopping until we're far beyond their reach. The trio eventually landed in a secluded forest far from Tartarus. The cool night air was a stark contrast to the fiery chaos they had left behind. Midoriya released his telekinetic hold, allowing them to touch down gently. Nagant stretched her arms, letting out a rare laugh. Well, that was smoother than I expected. You really had everything figured out. Todo leaned against a tree, his grin wide. I've got to hand it to you, King. That was badass. Blowing up 𝗧𝗧𝗃𝗧 and using the confusion to escape. Genius. Midoriya's expression didn't waver, his voice steady and cold. 𝗧𝗧𝗃𝗧 was a means to an end. Sacrifices must be made for the greater plan. Nagant raised an eyebrow, intrigued. And what's the plan exactly? Midoriya turned to face them, his eerie gaze burning with intensity. To build something stronger than any hero or villain has ever seen. You two are just the beginning. We'll gather power, resources, and allies. And then we'll reshape the world in our image. The silence that followed was heavy, but it carried an unspoken agreement. Midoriya's vision was bold, dangerous, and undeniably captivating. Together, they were free, but their journey was only beginning. As the moonlight filtered through the dense canopy of the forest, Midoriya stepped away from Nagant and Todo, pulling a small device from his pocket. The faint hum of static greeted him as he activated it, holding it close to his face. He spoke with cold precision, his voice resonating with an eerie calmness. It's me. I've made it out, and I have 2 more with me. Get to my location. You already know where I am. The line was silent for a moment before a deep, steady voice replied, Understood. EA is 30 minutes. Midoriya ended the call, slipping the device back into his pocket. He turned to face Nagant and Todo, who were watching him with curiosity. Todo raised an eyebrow. You got backup coming? Someone you trust that much? Midoriya's gaze remained unreadable. Trust is irrelevant. Efficiency isn't. They'll get us to where we need to be. Nagant crossed her arms, leaning casually against a tree. I assume this means you already have a safe house planned out. Midoriya nodded, his tone unwavering. Not just a safe house. A headquarters. The foundation of what we're building. Todo smirked, clearly entertained. You've got this all figured out, don't you? Must be nice to have people ready to move at a moment's notice. Midoriya glanced at him, his black sclera and white pupils gleaming faintly in the moonlight. I don't waste time on uncertainty. Every step, every decision, is calculated. That's why we're not just surviving. We're preparing to dominate. Nagant gave a small nod of approval. Impressive. If nothing else, you have the vision and the resources to back it up. The trio waited in silence, each lost in their thoughts. The distant sound of a vehicle approaching soon broke the quiet. Midoriya's voice was low but commanding as he addressed them. They're here. Follow my lead. From this point on, we move with purpose. Todo chuckled, adjusting his stance. Lead the way, King. Let's see where this ride takes us. Nagant simply smiled, her sharp eyes glinting in anticipation. Let's get to work. The headlights of an unmarked vehicle pierced through the forest as it rolled to a stop before them. The door opened, and a figure stepped out, their face obscured by shadows. Without hesitation, Midoriya moved forward, signaling for Nagant and Todo to follow. The journey was far from over, but the foundation of Midoriya's plans was already beginning to take shape. As the figure emerged from the vehicle, their sharp suit and poised demeanor hinted at a level of professionalism that matched the tone Midoriya had set. Without saying a word, the man opened the back door and gestured for the trio to enter. Todo whistled low under his breath. "You've got quite the operation, King. Show for service too." Midoriya didn't respond, his icy demeanor unwavering. Instead, he gestured for Todo and Nagant to get in before stepping inside himself. The interior of the vehicle was sleek and unmarked, designed for discretion and efficiency. As the car began to move, the man in the driver's seat broke the silence. "The house is prepped. Security has been doubled since your last visit. All requested resources are in place." Midoriya's voice was steady, authoritative. "But what's the perimeter status?" "Clear. Surveillance covers a 5-mile radius. No activity reported." Nagant raised an eyebrow, impressed despite herself. "You've really thought of everything, haven't you?" Midoriya turned his cold gaze toward her. "Preparation is the difference between success and failure. We don't leave anything to chance." Todo leaned back in his seat, his arms crossed casually. "All right, King. You've got the resources, the plans, and the people. But what's next? You've got me curious." Midoriya didn't answer immediately. He stared out the window, his mind already 10 steps ahead. Finally he spoke. "Next, we consolidate. We assess our strengths, fill in our weaknesses, and prepare for what's to come." Todo smirked. "Straight to the point. I like that." The rest of the ride was quiet, the air thick with anticipation. When the vehicle finally pulled up to the secluded mansion, its imposing structure loomed against the night sky. Guarded gates slid open, and armed personnel discreetly monitored the area. As they stepped out of the car, Nagant glanced around, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. "This is more than just a safe house. This is a fortress." Midoriya walked toward the entrance, his steps deliberate. "It's the beginning, the foundation for something much bigger." Inside, the mansion was a blend of functionality and luxury. State-of-the-art technology filled the rooms, and every corner seemed designed for either comfort or combat readiness. The man who had driven them handed Midoriya a tablet. "Everything is as you requested. The dossiers on potential recruits have been updated, and all funds have been transferred to the designated accounts." Midoriya nodded, his cold gaze scanning the information. "Good. Ensure our movements remain untraceable. I'll handle the rest." Todo clapped a hand on Midoriya's shoulder, his grin wide. "You've got a hell of a setup here. I'm starting to think I made the right choice following you." Midoriya turned to face him, his expression unreadable. "You'll see soon enough." Nagant leaned against the wall, her arms crossed. "So, what's the first move from here?" Midoriya's eyes darkened, the weight of his ambition reflected in his gaze. "We build. We train. And when the time comes, we take everything." The room fell silent, the gravity of his words settling over them. This wasn't just the start of an escape, it was the start of a revolution. Midoriya's cold gaze turned toward Todo, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "Well, Todo, here's your ticket to meet your favorite ideal, Kota-chan. A personal meeting. I arranged it just for you," he said, his voice low and smooth, yet carrying an edge of amusement. Todo's eyes lit up with excitement, his usually calm demeanor breaking for a moment. "Kota-chan? Seriously?" he asked, leaning forward eagerly. "You're not messing with me, are you?" Midoriya's smirk grew slightly, though his expression remained otherwise detached. "Why would I waste time messing with you? I have other things to focus on. But," he added, his voice lowering ominously, "don't forget who arranged it. This isn't just a favor." Todo leaned back, his grin wide. "Fair enough, King. If this is for real, you've earned my loyalty twice over." Nagant, watching the exchange with a raised brow, crossed her arms. "And what about me?" You have any personal meetings or surprises planned for me, oh great king? Midoriya's expression shifted ever so slightly, the hint of amusement in his eyes vanishing. Do what you like, Nagant. I won't stop you. You've already proven your worth. She tilted her head, her smirk faint but present. Do what I like. Dangerous words, king. But I'll take you up on that. Just don't be surprised if I bring something unexpected to the table. Midoriya turned away, his hands in his pockets as he walked toward the large map on the wall. His voice, as detached and commanding as ever, echoed in the room. To do, enjoy your moment. Nagant, do whatever you feel is necessary. But don't forget we're on a schedule. I expect you both to be ready when the time comes. To do leaned back against the wall, a satisfied grin on his face. Kota-chan, here I come. King, you really know how to treat your commanders. Nagant chuckled softly, shaking her head. You're an enigma, Midoriya. Cold as ice, but you know exactly how to play the game. Midoriya didn't respond, his focus already elsewhere. His mind was a web of plans, each strand leading toward the singular goal he had set for himself. For now, he allowed his allies their moment, knowing full well that when the time came, they would be ready to follow his lead. As 𝗧𝗵𝗲 smirking to himself as he said to himself, I will have my revenge, you shitty beasts. I will take all the things that you all love, especially you Katsuki. I won't stay silent till I finish everything that you care about, your hero status, your pride, and worst, your quirk. I will make you feel like Deku that you made me feel all those years. Because of you I lost everything I cared about. As 𝗧𝗵𝗲 he was there in rage as we see his raging face. Midoriya stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the sleek black suit he had chosen for today. It was sharp and commanding, a symbol of his growing influence. He slid on a pair of tinted glasses, the final touch to complete the look. Today's meeting wasn't just any meeting, it was a gathering of his father's most powerful allies, heads of various families, and individuals who controlled underground networks. This was the day he would solidify his presence as a leader. Nagant leaned against the wall behind him, her gaze sharp and appraising. Suit looks good on you, kid. Fits the image you're trying to sell. To-do smirked, his hands in his pockets. Looking sharp, king. This meeting better be as interesting as you made it sound. Midoriya didn't respond immediately, instead focusing on the cuffs of his shirt. Finally, he turned to face them, his expression calm but authoritative. Let's go. With a single step, Midoriya activated the teleportation quirk he had acquired, a swirling mist engulfing him and his two allies. The sensation was brief, and in an instant, they were transported to a grand, dimly lit room. The space was expansive, with a large oval table at its center, surrounded by some of the most influential figures in the underworld. Heads turned as the mist dissipated, revealing Midoriya flanked by Nagant and To-do. His presence commanded immediate attention, the room falling silent as he strode confidently to the head of the table. The suit, coupled with his aura of authority, left no doubt in anyone's mind. This wasn't the boy they might have underestimated. This was someone who was ready to claim his position. As he took his seat, Midoriya's voice broke the silence, calm yet filled with purpose. Gentlemen and ladies, I've called you here today to discuss the future. My father may no longer be in charge, but his legacy will not fade. I intend to take it further, to bring all of you into an era of strength and prosperity. The room buzzed with murmurs, but no one dared interrupt. Nagant and To-do stood behind him, their presence reinforcing the weight of his words. Midoriya leaned forward slightly, his gaze piercing as he surveyed the room. The world is changing. Heroes are faltering, and their system is more fragile than ever. Together we will reshape it. But first, I need to know who among you is truly loyal to this cause. He gestured subtly, and a holographic map of the world appeared in the center of the table, highlighting key regions under his father's influence. These are the assets we currently control. But this is only the beginning. With your cooperation, and my leadership, we can expand far beyond these borders. The family heads exchanged glances, some nodding in agreement while others remained skeptical. One man, older and with a scar running down his cheek, spoke up. And what guarantees do we have that you can handle this responsibility, boy? Your father, Midoriya cut him off with a sharp glare, his voice cold and unwavering. My father trusted you all to uphold his vision. If you doubt me, you're free to leave. But know this, those who stand with me will rise, and those who oppose me will fall. The room fell silent once more, the weight of his words sinking in. Nagant smirked subtly, and Todo chuckled under his breath. Midoriya had made his position clear, and the room now understood that this was no ordinary meeting. This was the beginning of a new era, one that would be shaped by his vision and his will. The room tensed as the scarred man rose from his seat, his voice cold and challenging. If you want us to follow you, boy, you'll have to prove you're worthy. Words don't mean a thing to me. Let's settle this the old way. A fight for the head position. Midoriya's black eyes gleamed, his face unreadable. Slowly, he removed his coat, folding it neatly and handing it to Nagant. Very well. If that's what it takes to make you understand, I accept. The man smirked, cracking his knuckles. Don't expect me to go easy on you, kid. You've got no idea who you're dealing with. Midoriya stepped into the center of the room, his movements calm and composed. His allies, Nagant and Todo, watched from the sidelines, both of them unfazed but curious. The room grew eerily quiet as the two opponents faced each other. Begin, one of the other heads declared. The fight was over almost as soon as it started. The man lunged at Midoriya, throwing a powerful punch, but Midoriya sidestepped effortlessly, his movements precise and fluid. Before the man could recover, Midoriya's fist slammed into his ribs, the sound of bones cracking echoing through the room. He didn't stop there. Blow after blow rained down on the man, each strike calculated and devastating. The scarred man screamed in pain as his bones shattered under Midoriya's relentless assault. His arms and legs were twisted at unnatural angles, his once proud figure reduced to a crumpled heap on the floor. By the time Midoriya stepped back, the man's entire body was a mangled mess, his bones turned to powder and his muscles reduced to jelly. The dimly lit room carried an oppressive atmosphere, heightened by the scent of BLD and the sight of carnage. Midoriya stood at the center, his back facing the rest of the crowd, his hands dripping with crimson evidence of the destruction he had wrought. Midoriya stood at the center, his back facing the rest of the crowd, his hands dripping with crimson evidence of the destruction he had wrought. The once proud head of the opposition lay crumpled and broken, his entire body shattered beyond recognition, reduced to little more than a limp mass of flesh and bone powder. Around him, his loyal followers lay battered and groaning, too terrified to even crawl away. Midoriya slowly turned his head, revealing his haunting appearance. His black sclera and glowing white pupils cut through the shadows, an unrelenting gaze that sent shivers down the spines of everyone present. His messy black hair framed his face like a shadow, amplifying the terrifying aura that emanated from him. The room was deathly silent as his cold, steady voice broke the stillness. Does anyone else have a problem like him? No one dared move. No one dared speak. Each breath was held as the fear of drawing his attention gripped the remaining heads. The oppressive air around Midoriya made it clear, challenging him meant more than defeat, it meant utter destruction. His gaze swept over the room, locking eyes with each person for a brief moment, ensuring his message was clear. Satisfied, he adjusted his coat, ignoring the BLD staining his hands. The air felt heavier as he moved back to his seat, each step a quiet reminder of his _𝗵𝗃. Good, he murmured, his tone as calm as it was menacing. Now let's proceed. As the meeting concluded and the room began to empty, Midoriya remained seated, his piercing gaze locked on the retreating figures of the family heads. He glanced at Todo, Aoi, and Nagant, signaling them to stay behind. The room fell silent once more, leaving only the sound of the faint wind seeping through the cracks in the walls. I've decided on the commanders, Midoriya announced, his voice calm yet commanding. These positions aren't just for show, they're the backbone of what we're building. Only those worthy of carrying the weight of this family's future will stand at my side. Todo Aoi nodded, his expression serious. Who do you have in mind? Midoriya turned to him, his black sclera eyes narrowing slightly. You and Nagant are two of them. Your strength and loyalty are unquestionable. The third, he paused for a moment, as if considering the gravity of his next words, will be someone with both the power to crush mountains and the wisdom to guide armies. I already have candidates in mind. They're not just allies, they're assets we can rely on. Nagant tilted her head, intrigued. And when will we meet them? Not yet, Midoriya replied, standing up and walking toward the open balcony that overlooked the city. When the time is right, you'll see them in action. Until then, prepare yourselves. The battles ahead won't wait for anyone. As he stepped onto the balcony, the moonlight bathed his figure, making the BLD on his coat gleam faintly. The weight of his authority seemed to ripple through the air as he looked up at the vast night sky. For a moment, there was only silence, broken by his words that resonated like a decree. To those who know not the absence of power, he began, his voice calm but imbued with an otherworldly authority, look toward the sky with your shattered ego. The one sky that no one could enter until the king was roused from his slumber. His words hung in the air like a proclamation, carrying with them the weight of his determination and vision. Behind him, Nagant and 𝗬𝗪𝗎𝗺 exchanged glances, understanding the gravity of his message. This was not just a declaration of his authority, it was a promise to the world that Midoriya was ready to claim his rightful place at the top. The night stretched on, but the resolve in Midoriya's eyes was unwavering. The king had indeed awakened, and the world would soon come to know the full extent of his power. As Midoriya stood on the balcony, his proclamation hung in the air like an unshakable decree. The weight of his words was not just for the family heads, it was a reflection of his journey, his pain, and his transformation. The king he spoke of was not just a title or symbol, but a testament to the strength forged from his brokenness. Once shattered by the world's cruelty, Midoriya had rebuilt himself into something far greater, something unyielding. He clenched his fists briefly, gazing at his blood-stained hands. Brokenness, he muttered to himself, is not the end, it's the beginning. His voice was low, but 𝗬𝗪𝗎𝗺 and Nagant heard him, their eyes reflecting a newfound respect for the man they followed. With a deep breath, Midoriya turned, his expression sharp and composed. He walked back into the room, removing the bloodied coat from his shoulders. A nearby subordinate quickly handed him a clean towel, and he wiped his hands meticulously, erasing the last traces of the violent encounter. When he was done, he took a fresh black coat, one that seemed to amplify his already intimidating presence. He adjusted the collar and turned toward 𝗬𝗪𝗎𝗺 and Nagant. Come, he said simply, his voice steady but commanding. We're leaving. Without hesitation, they followed him. Midoriya raised his hand, activating his teleportation ability, and in a flash, they disappeared from the family estate. In an instant, they reappeared at their base, a fortress of steel and shadows that reflected Midoriya's ironclad resolve. The air there was heavy with purpose, the faint hum of machinery and quiet murmurs of loyal allies filling the atmosphere. Midoriya stepped forward, his boots echoing against the floor, and glanced over his shoulder at 𝗬𝗪𝗎𝗺 and Nagant. This base, he said, is not just a sanctuary. It's a symbol of our strength, a place where we build the future I've envisioned. His gaze sharpened, his tone unyielding. You are my commanders, and with you by my side, there is nothing we cannot accomplish. 𝗬𝗪𝗎𝗺 smirked, nodding in agreement. Understood. We'll follow you to the end. Nagant's voice was equally firm. Lead the way, and we'll make sure no one dares to stand in your path. Midoriya's eyes softened, just for a moment. He was grateful for their loyalty, but he knew that this path was as dangerous as it was necessary. Turning back to the base, he walked forward, his mind already focused on the challenges ahead. The king had awakened, and now, it was time to reshape the world. The scene shifts to a bright morning at high school, where Katsuki Bakugo enters Class 2A with his usual scowl. The classroom is filled with the chatter of his classmates, some laughing, others discussing their training sessions. Bakugo ignores it all, heading straight to his seat, slamming his bag down with a grunt. Denon extras, he mutters under his breath, though his tone carries less venom than it once did. As the bell rings, Isawa shuffles into the classroom, his perpetually tired expression unchanged. All right, settle down, he says lazily, pulling out his lesson plan. The class quiets down, ready to begin the day's lesson. But just as Isawa begins to speak, a faint pinging sound echoes through the room as everyone's phones vibrate simultaneously. Curious, the students pull out their devices. Bakugo furrows his brow, muttering, "What the hell now?" Before anyone can say anything, Aizawa's voice cuts through the murmurs. "Put your phones away. That includes you, Kaminari," he says sternly, his gaze sweeping the class. "Focus on the lesson. Whatever it is, it can wait." The students reluctantly comply, though some keep their phones hidden under their desks. Suddenly, Aizawa's phone vibrates as well. He glances at the notification, and his normally calm demeanor shifts subtly. Without another word, he shuts his phone off and walks toward the door. "I need to speak with Principal Nizu. Stay here and focus on your assignments." As soon as he leaves the room, the students erupt into whispers. "What do you think it is?" Mina asks, leaning over to Kirishima. "I don't know," he replies, his tone uneasy. But Sensei looked off. Unable to resist the growing tension, several students sneak glances at their phones. Bakugo scoffs but ultimately pulls out his own device. His eyes widen slightly as he stares at the headline plastered across the screen. Izuku Midoriya escapes high-security prison. Authorities scramble to contain threat. A wave of shock ripples through the room. "Midoriya!" Ida whispers, his voice laced with disbelief. "He escaped." Mina covers her mouth, her eyes wide. "But how? That prison was supposed to be unbreakable." Todoroki's usually stoic expression falters. "This isn't good," he mutters. Bakugo's grip on his phone tightens as he glares at the screen. His mind races with questions, but one thought dominates. "Deku, what the hell are you doing?" Meanwhile, in Principal Nizu's office, Aizawa enters to find Nizu and All Might seated across from one another. The atmosphere is tense. All Might, his face drawn with concern, turns to Aizawa as he steps in. "Aizawa," All Might says, his voice low, "is it true? Did he really escape?" Aizawa sighs, rubbing the bridge of his nose. The reports seem to confirm it. He's out, and no one knows how he managed it. All Might's hands clench into fists, a mix of guilt and worry clouding his expression. "I need to find him. There's no telling what he might do." Nizu interjects, his calm demeanor betraying the gravity of the situation. "Before we act, we need to assess the situation carefully." Midoriya's escape raises questions, not just about how he managed it, but what his intentions are now. Aizawa nods, his face grim. "We need to prepare for the worst. If he's gone rogue, we'll have to stop him no matter what." The room falls silent, the weight of their task settling heavily on their shoulders. Outside, the students of Class 1A grapple with the revelation, the image of their once friend and classmate now painted in a chilling new light. In the tense atmosphere of Principal Nizu's office, Aizawa absorbs the troubling news All Might just shared. The silence is broken by Nizu, who says, "There's something else the media hasn't disclosed yet." Aizawa raises an eyebrow, his expression growing darker. "What is it?" Nizu sighs, folding his hands. Alongside Midoriya's escape, two others manage to break out, Lady Nagant and a young man by the name of Todo Aoi. The name seems to ring a bell for Aizawa. He narrows his eyes and leans forward slightly. "Todo Aoi? You mean that boy? The one who's supposedly the protege of her, that demon woman, Yuki Tsukumo. The so-called hero, who barely lifts a finger to help and spends all her time globetrotting." All Might's eyebrows furrow, clearly familiar with the controversial reputation of Yuki Tsukumo. Aoi, wasn't he being detained for his involvement in a classified incident? Something even the Hero Commission refused to disclose. Nizu nods solemnly. "Precisely. Todo Aoi isn't just any escapee. He's an incredibly dangerous variable. From what we've gathered, his potential and abilities rival even some of the best pro-heroes. Yuki Tsukumo may not have been much for conventional hero work, but her teaching methods seem to have created someone formidable." Aizawa rubs his temples, muttering, "Just great. As if Midoriya wasn't enough of a headache already. Have you contacted Tsukumo about this?" Nizu shakes his head. Not yet. Tsukumo has always been elusive. Tracking her down is proving difficult. But we're prioritizing it. If anyone has insight into 𝗳𝗏𝗍𝗀𝗧's plans or mindset, it would be her. Isawa scoffs. Evasive as always. Typical of her. We might as well prepare for the worst. If 𝗳𝗏𝗍𝗀𝗧 is involved, and he's aligned himself with Nagant or Midoriya, then things are going to spiral out of control fast. All Might clenches his fists. We can't let this happen. Midoriya, Nagant, and 𝗏𝗍𝗀 together could pose an unprecedented threat, not just to the heroes, but to society itself. Nizu, ever calm, nods. We need to act swiftly but intelligently. I'll reach out to our contacts, including any resources Yuki Tsukumo might have left behind. In the meantime, we must prepare to brief other heroes and reinforce security around all sensitive locations. Isawa sighs, his usual exhaustion now mixed with visible frustration. We're juggling way too many problems at once. Let's just hope we can get a step ahead before things explode. The weight of the situation hangs heavily over the room. As they finalize their plans, the threat posed by Izuku Midoriya, Lady Nagant, and 𝗳𝗏𝗍𝗀𝗧 looms large, a storm waiting to break across the hero world. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in Class 1A was suffocating. Fear, regret, and unease filled the room as the students stared at their phones, their trembling fingers scrolling through the breaking news about Izuku Midoriya's prison escape. The media speculated wildly, showing images of the broken Tartarus gates and recounting Izuku's past exploits, both heroic and villainous. I can't believe this, Kaminari muttered, his voice shaking. He really escaped. What's he going to do now? We know what he's going to do, Jirou said quietly, her eyes wide with fear. He's coming for us. For revenge. Mina, usually so cheerful, was pale. We betrayed him, all of us. Even when we knew he was innocent. Katsuki Bakugo sat at his desk, glaring at the screen with clenched fists. Decadent, you better not. But even he couldn't finish the sentence. Deep down, he knew Midoriya had every reason to come after them. The tension only escalated when Ida abruptly stood, his chair screeching against the floor. Enough, he shouted, his stern voice cutting through the panic. All eyes turned to him. This is not the time for us to lose ourselves to fear. If we regret our actions, then we must act responsibly now. Sitting here in terror won't solve anything. But what are we supposed to do? Mina asked, tears brimming in her eyes. He's not the same Deku we knew. You saw the news. He escaped Tartarus, for crying out loud. Do you know what kind of strength that takes? Ida adjusted his glasses, his hands trembling despite his attempt to remain composed. I'm going to speak with Mr. Isawa. We need to take accountability for what we did to Midoriya. Perhaps there is still a chance to resolve this without conflict. Resolve it? Kirishima exclaimed. Bro, he's probably furious with us. Do you really think he's going to just talk things out? Whether he will or not is irrelevant, Ida shot back. It is our responsibility as heroes to face the consequences of our actions. If Midoriya intends to come for us, then we must be prepared to meet him, not with violence, but with understanding. Bakugo scoffed, slamming his hand on his desk. Understanding? You don't get it, do you, Four Eyes? Deku's not the same. Crybaby anymore. He's out for BLD, and you think he's just gonna sit down and listen. Ida didn't back down. And whose fault is that, Bakugo? All of us, including you, pushed him to this point. If anyone has the power to change the course of this tragedy, it's us. The room fell silent. No one had a response. The weight of Ida's words hung in the air as they all reflected on their betrayal of the boy who had once been their classmate, their friend, and in many ways, their inspiration. With determination in his steps, Ida marched toward the door. I will not sit idly by while fear consumes us. If any of you truly care about making amends, you will follow me. Otherwise, live with your guilt. He exited the room, leaving his classmates to wrestle with their own consciences. As the door closed, the students exchanged uncertain glances. One by one, the weight of their regrets became unbearable. Slowly, they began to stand, following Ida's lead. The class knew they couldn't change the past, but perhaps, just perhaps, they could still shape the future, if Izuku would let them. As Class 1A began to file out after Ida, the door suddenly slid open with a sharp thud, revealing a furious-looking Isawa. His scarred face was taut with frustration, his hair slightly disheveled, and his capture weapon hung loosely around his neck. He marched to the front of the classroom, his gaze sharp as knives, and snapped, "Sit down, brats." No. The students hesitated, their earlier determination crumbling under Isawa's steely glare. One by one, they returned to their seats, their nerves frayed as they braced for whatever bombshell their teacher was about to drop. "Let me make something perfectly clear to you all," Isawa began, his voice low but heavy with authority. "If any of you think you can go after Midoriya, you're not just walking into danger, you're signing your death warrant. That boy isn't the same student you know. He's stronger, angrier, and he has every reason to come for revenge. If you step out of line, he won't leave any of you alive." The room was silent, save for the muffled gasps and uneasy shuffling of the students. Even Bakugo, who had been glaring defiantly moments earlier, looked unsettled. Isawa took a deep breath before delivering the crushing truth. "Do you all want to know why Midoriya is as powerful and dangerous as he is now? Because he's not just any kid. He's the son of All-for-One." The revelation hit the room like a grenade. The students stared at their teacher in shock, disbelief written across their faces. It was Mina who finally found her voice, though it came out as little more than a whisper. "What?" Isawa nodded grimly. "That's right. All-for-One, the greatest villain this world has ever known, disguised himself as Hisashi Midoriya. He played the role of a loving father, all while planning for his son to become his legacy. Izuku didn't know it at first, but his cursed bloodline caught up with him. And now, with everything he's been through, he's embraced it." The silence that followed was suffocating. The weight of Aizawa's words pressed down on everyone like a heavy storm cloud. Kirishima broke the silence, his voice trembling. But Midoriya, he's not like All-for-One. He's not a villain. Aizawa cut him off, his tone sharp. "You don't get it, Kirishima. Midoriya isn't the same person anymore. He's been broken, abandoned, and betrayed by the people he trusted most. Do you think he's just going to let that slide? Even if he doesn't fully embrace his father's legacy, he's not the hero you once knew." "But what can we do, Mr. Aizawa?" Yaoyorozu asked, her voice quivering. "How can we fix this?" Aizawa sighed deeply, his usually tired eyes showing a flicker of something close to regret. "I don't know if you can fix this. Midoriya isn't someone you can simply apologize to anymore. He's gone beyond that. And now, with Lady Nagant and Todo Aoi escaping alongside him, you're looking at a potential storm that even the top heroes might not survive." Bakugo slammed his fists on his desk, his face twisted in anger and frustration. "Do you mean it? So what are we supposed to do, huh? Just sit here and wait for him to come after us?" Aizawa's gaze hardened. "No, Bakugo. You're supposed to stay out of his way. If you value your lives, you'll listen to me and stop any foolish attempts to confront him. Because if you don't, it won't just be Midoriya you'll have to face, it'll be the full wrath of the monster All-for-One created." The room was deathly silent as the weight of the truth sank in. Each student felt the crushing guilt of their betrayal, the fear of Midoriya's vengeance, and the hopelessness of the situation. Aizawa turned toward the door, pausing before leaving. "Remember this," he said, his voice carrying an air of finality. "We all made our choices back then. Now we'll have to live with the consequences." With that, he left the room, leaving the students to grapple with their regret and the storm that loomed over them. In the dimly lit hideout, Midoriya sat on a high-end couch, his expression cold and unreadable. The flickering light of a monitor illuminated his sharp features, his black sclera and white pupils giving him an otherworldly, almost haunting appearance. He clenched his fists, the familiar pang of longing tightening in his chest. "I need to get my mom's ashes," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. His words hung heavy in the air, yet carried with them a determination that felt unshakable. He turned to Lady Nagant and Todo Aoi, who stood silently nearby. "You two stay here. I'll handle this alone," he commanded, his voice carrying the weight of someone who was no longer the broken boy they once knew but a king ready to claim what was his. Before they could respond, he disappeared, his form vanishing in a dark haze as he teleported. The living room of the Bakugo household was eerily quiet when Midoriya appeared, his presence sending an immediate chill through the air. Mitsuki Bakugo, who had been sitting on the couch, froze as she saw him. She didn't recognize him at first. The black 𝗧𝗪𝗓, the cold, emotionless face, and his jet-black hair made him look like a stranger. But then, something familiar sparked in her mind. "Izuku," she whispered, her voice trembling. Midoriya gave her a faint smile, one that carried neither warmth nor malice, only a cold indifference. "Hello, Auntie Mitsuki," he said, his voice steady and calm, as though he wasn't a wanted fugitive who had escaped prison just days ago. Mitsuki's hands trembled as she got up, her instincts torn between fear and the maternal love she'd once felt for the boy who had grown up alongside her son. "I'll make some tea," she stammered, avoiding his piercing gaze. Midoriya watched her move to the kitchen in silence, his mind calculating every step. He knew she was scared. How could she not be? He wasn't the same Izuku Midoriya she remembered. But she also hadn't called for help. That, at least, he could respect. When she returned with tea, they sat quietly. Mitsuki didn't dare speak, but her eyes flickered with unease as they darted to his inhuman eyes and the ominous air he carried. Midoriya took a sip of the tea, his expression unchanging. "Thank you," he finally said, breaking the silence. Mitsuki blinked, startled by the unexpected gratitude. "For what?" she asked hesitantly. "For taking care of my mom's funeral," he replied. His voice didn't waver, but there was a heaviness in his tone that made her chest tighten. Mitsuki swallowed hard, unsure of how to respond. Before she could say anything, Midoriya stood, his presence towering over her. "For that I'll let you live. But your son won't have this opportunity," he said coldly. Mitsuki's eyes widened in horror, but before she could react, he moved swiftly, knocking her out with a precise strike. As her body slumped onto the couch, Midoriya crouched down, his hand glowing faintly as he used a quirk to erase her memory of the encounter. "You don't need to remember this," he murmured, his tone almost gentle. He moved through the house with purpose, collecting everything that had belonged to his mother. Her sweater, her degree, and a few other keepsakes she had cherished. When he was done, he glanced back at Mitsuki, her unconscious form lying peacefully on the couch. Without a word, he teleported away. Midoriya reappeared in his old apartment, the air thick with dust and the faint scent of neglect. He moved through the familiar space, his chest tightening with every step. The memories of his childhood, of his mother's laughter, of her unwavering love, all of it came flooding back. He methodically collected everything she had left behind, ensuring no memory was forgotten. Then, as he opened the fridge, he froze. Inside, preserved as though waiting for him, was a serving of katsudon, his favorite dish. It was old but still intact, a testament to his mother's care and love, even in her final days. Midoriya's breath hitched as he took the bowl out, heating it quietly. The apartment was silent except for the faint hum of the microwave. When the dish was ready, he sat at the small table, his hands trembling slightly as he took his first bite. The familiar taste hit him like a wave, and for the first time in years, tears began to fall. They were silent, thinning down his cold, stoic face as he ate. He didn't sob or cry out, but the pain in his heart was evident in every tear that escaped. He finished the katsudon in silence, his mind replaying every moment he'd shared with his mother. Her voice, her smile, her unyielding love, all of it felt so distant yet so close. As he set the bowl down, he whispered, his voice cracking for the first time in what felt like an eternity, "I'm sorry, Mom." He stood, collecting the last of her belongings, and teleported back to his base, leaving behind the empty apartment that once held his happiest memories. Midoriya reappeared in his hideout, the soft hum of energy from his teleportation quirk fading into the stillness of the room. Lady Nagant and Todo were seated nearby, the faint tension of the base replaced with an uneasy silence as they noticed the change in his demeanor. His usual cold and calculating presence seemed heavier, his movements slower, as if the weight of his actions had finally settled on his shoulders. Nagant glanced up, her sharp eyes narrowing slightly as she took in his appearance. "You got what you needed?" she asked carefully. Midoriya nodded, placing the items he had taken on a table, a neatly folded sweater, a framed degree, a few personal trinkets, and finally, an urn containing his mother's ashes. His hands lingered on the urn for a moment before he straightened, his face once again a mask of emotionless resolve. "Everything important," he replied, his voice calm but strained. 𝗬𝗪𝗎 observed him from his seat, unwrapping a fresh lollipop as he spoke. "You're quieter than usual," he remarked. "Did something happen?" Midoriya didn't respond immediately. He walked over to a basin of water nearby and began to wash his hands, scrubbing away the faint remnants of dust and grime from the apartment. He looked at his reflection in the rippling water, the black sclera and white pupils staring back at him like a stranger. "I ate her katsudon," he finally said, his voice barely audible. Nagant and Todo exchanged a glance, the weight of those words sinking in. It wasn't just about the food, it was about the connection, the memories, the life he had lost. Nagant stepped closer, her expression softening just enough to be noticeable. "And?" she prompted gently. Midoriya dried his hands on a towel, his movements methodical, almost robotic. "It tasted the same," he said, his voice empty. "But it felt different. Everything does now." The room fell into a heavy silence, the unspoken pain in his words filling the air. Nagant placed a hand on his shoulder, her grip firm but understanding. "You don't have to carry it all alone, you know," she said. "We're here." Todo chimed in, his tone casual but sincere. "Yeah, and if you ever want to talk or I don't know, fight it out, I'm around." Midoriya gave them both a faint nod, his gaze flickering to the items on the table. "Thank you," he said simply. It was rare for him to express gratitude, but in that moment, it felt necessary. He turned away, his mind already shifting back to the tasks ahead. There was no time for mourning, no space for vulnerability, not yet. He had plans to make allies to gather and enemies to crush. But as he moved to the center of the room, preparing to focus on his next steps, his voice carried one final whisper, almost too soft to hear. "She would have liked you both." Nagant and Todo froze, their expressions momentarily stunned. But before they could respond, Midoriya straightened, his cold, calculating demeanor returning like a mask firmly in place. "We have work to do," he said, his tone commanding once more. "Prepare yourselves. We're just getting started." And with that, the king who had risen from his slumber resumed his march toward destiny, carrying the weight of his past in silence, even as the fire of his resolve burned brighter than ever. Isawa rushed to the teacher's office faster than he'd ever moved before. His heart raced, his mind plagued with questions. This wasn't just another crisis. This was personal, something that struck deep within him and his colleagues. The moment Isawa entered the teacher's office, he found his colleagues already gathered. Mike, Midnight, Nizu, and even All Might, their faces drawn in concern. The air was heavy with tension, and the weight of the situation pressed down on everyone present. Isawa took a breath, his voice breaking the strained silence. "Is it true?" Everyone in the room knew exactly what he was referring to, the explosion at Tartarus. The news was spreading like wildfire. 3 inmates had escaped: Izuku Midoriya, Lady Nagant, and Todo. Each of them dangerous in their own way, and each raising 1,000 questions. Nizu nodded solemnly, his tiny paws folded in front of him. "It's confirmed. Midoriya, Nagant, and Todo have all escaped. As of now, we have no leads on their whereabouts." Aizawa's voice grew more insistent. "What about Yuki Tsukumo? And Detective 𝗬𝗂𝗁? Why haven't we heard anything from them?" Nizu's expression darkened. "Detective 𝗬𝗂𝗁 is still unavailable. He's working closely with the commission to assess the situation at Tartarus. As for Yuki Tsukumo, he hesitated, which was rare for him. She's gone missing. We suspect she may have been involved, but nothing is confirmed." The room fell silent, the implications of Nizu's words weighing heavily on everyone. Months ago, when Izuku Midoriya had first been arrested, Isawa had been convinced it was the right call. The evidence had seemed irrefutable. A notebook filled with detailed information about every hero, from their quirks to their weaknesses. Names like 𝗵𝗲𝗍𝗪, Death Arms, even Isawa himself, were listed with terrifying precision. And then there was the testimony. 𝗵𝗃𝗁 had pointed the finger, claiming Midoriya was the traitor leaking information to the League of Villains. Combined with the notes, it had been enough to secure Midoriya's arrest. Isawa had pushed for it. He'd believed it was the logical choice, even if a small voice in the back of his mind had nagged at him. But now, with Midoriya's escape, everything was being called into question. Midnight spoke up, breaking Isawa's troubled thoughts. I can't help but feel this whole situation is unfair. Are we absolutely certain Midoriya is the traitor? Her words hung in the air, challenging the narrative they had all accepted. Isawa clenched his fists. Midnight had been vocal about her doubts from the beginning, but now, they were starting to resonate with others in the room. Isawa, she pressed, her voice trembling with frustration. You've always believed Midoriya was guilty. But did you ever stop to consider other possibilities? We've only ever heard one side of the story, the side presented by that notebook, and maybe even Bakugo's bias. Isawa opened his mouth to respond, but Midnight wasn't finished. You favored Bakugo, she said bluntly. You saw him as the better student, and you let that blind you. Midoriya never stood a chance with you. You never gave him one. The room was silent. Isawa felt the sting of her words because they were true. He had been harder on Midoriya than on any other student, and now he was starting to wonder if that bias had led him to make a terrible mistake. Meanwhile, the next day, the remaining members of Class 1A were struggling to process the news. Uraraka, Ida, Tsuyu, and Shoto sat in silence, their heads bowed in shock. Kaminari fidgeted nervously, while Kirishima and Shiro exchanged worried glances. Katsuki Bakugo, however, sat with his usual brooding expression, his hands clenched into fists. But beneath his usual rage, there was fear. He had been the loudest voice accusing Midoriya, the one who had planted the idea in everyone's minds that Midoriya was the traitor. And now, with Midoriya free, Bakugo was starting to realize the consequences of his actions. Flashback, framing Midoriya months earlier, the group had casually discussed Midoriya in the dorms. The conversation had started lightheartedly but quickly turned darker. I think he's a bit much, Kirishima had said, rubbing the back of his head. Always taking notes and muttering during practice. Yeah, and he acts all nice, but it just feels fake, Uraraka had added, her tone unusually bitter. The nerd always acts like that, Bakugo had sneered. Begging for attention since middle school. It hadn't taken long for Bakugo to propose his plan, framing Midoriya as the traitor. He'd pointed to Midoriya's notebook, saying it could easily be spun as evidence of spying. And the others, in their frustration and jealousy, had gone along with it. They had watched as Midoriya was taken away, convinced they had rid themselves of a problem. But now, with Midoriya free, the guilt was starting to eat at them. Back in the teacher's office, Isawa stood by the window, staring out at the training grounds but not really seeing them. Midnight's words echoed in his mind, you never gave him a chance. Nizu spoke up again, his voice soft but firm. We don't have all the answers yet, but one thing is clear, this situation is far more complex than we initially thought. For now, we need to focus on maintaining order at U. The police will handle the investigation. Isawa nodded reluctantly. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that they had made a terrible mistake, and that Midoriya, Nagant, and Todo were only the beginning of their problems. As he is still regretting the words Namuri said and how much deep involved, he is in it as well. Flashback, it should have changed everything months ago. Namuri's voice exploded through the room, and every pair of eyes turned to her. Her usual playful demeanor was gone, replaced by unbridled fury. She marched straight up to Isawa, jabbing a finger into his chest. You knew, she hissed. You knew this was wrong from the start, Shoyuda, and you let it happen anyway. You let your bias blind you, and now look what's happened. Isawa stepped back, startled by her outburst. Namuri, we've been over this. The evidence was overwhelming. His notes, his behavior. We had every reason to believe. Bullshit, she snapped, cutting him off. Every reason. Or just every excuse. You favored Bakugo from the start, and don't you dare deny it. That boy could do no wrong in your eyes, and you didn't even look at Midoriya properly. Not once. Namuri, that's enough, Nizu interjected, but she ignored him. Do you even know what happened after you threw him in Tartarus, Shoyuta? Do you know who was there for Inko Midoriya's funeral? Her voice cracked, tears threatening to spill. Not you. Not Nizu. Not All Might. No one. It was just me and Mitsuki Bakugo. Aizawa froze, his face pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Do you know what they did at her grave? Namuri continued, her voice shaking with rage. They booed her. Civilians stood there, screaming that she raised a traitor, blaming her for everything. I had to fight to move her grave to a secret location. Mitsuki and I were the only ones who even cared. The room was dead silent. Nizu's ears drooped, and Mike looked down at the floor, guilt written across his face. And now, thanks to you, Namuri spat, stepping closer to Aizawa, Izuku knows. He'll come for us, and he won't just stop at revenge. Do you even understand the storm you've unleashed? Namuri, Aizawa finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper, I didn't know. Of course you didn't, she said bitterly. Because you never looked. You let Bakugo's lies and your own 𝗵𝗵𝗃 pride make the decision for you. She turned away, pacing again as if she couldn't bear to look at him. Do you know who else hates you now, Shoyuta? She's with me now, and she despises you. She doesn't understand why you weren't there for Midoriya, why you let someone who saved her be treated like trash. Eri, Aizawa whispered, the word like a dagger to his heart. She's not the only one, Namuri said, her voice quieter now but no less sharp. That boy Kota. The one Midoriya saved at the training camp. He hates you too. He hates all of us. And they're right to. The weight of her words crashed down on Aizawa like a landslide. He looked to Nizu for support, but the principal's eyes were downcast. What do we do now? Mike asked, breaking the tense silence. Namuri let out a bitter laugh. What do? We wait. Because there's no stopping him now. Izuku Midoriya isn't just coming for the people who betrayed him. He's coming for the society that let it happen. And God help us when he does. Flashback ends nighttime. The dimly lit office was silent except for the soft scratching of Eraserhead's pen against paper. Aizawa Shoyuta sat hunched over his desk, the flickering light from a small lamp casting shadows across his tired face. His unkempt hair fell into his eyes as he paused mid-sentence, his pen hovering above the page. The silence of the room did little to quiet the storm brewing in his mind. It had been years since that day, yet the memory lingered like an open wound. Izuku Midoriya, the boy with so much potential, so much drive, had been captured and imprisoned. The weight of the decisions still bore down on him. Aizawa had thought it was the right thing to do, to protect society, but the aftermath was something he had never anticipated. He leaned back in his chair, eyes drifting to the ceiling as his thoughts wandered back to that moment, the moment Eri's heart shattered. The memory was vivid, as if it had happened yesterday. Aizawa had returned home late that night, his body heavy with exhaustion and fatigue. The news of Midoriya's imprisonment was everywhere, every channel, every newspaper. He knew Eri would hear about it eventually, but he hadn't expected her to be awake when he walked through the door. The sight that greeted him was seared into his memory. Eri sat on the couch, her small frame trembling as she clutched a pillow to her chest. Her scarlet eyes were wide with disbelief, tears streaming down her pale cheeks. The television was on, the news anchor's voice echoing through the room. Pro-hero Deku, captured today, is now being detained for alleged crimes involving All for One. Investigations are ongoing, but the evidence, Aizawa's voice was hoarse as he took a cautious step forward. She turned to him, her face crumpling as more tears spilled. You knew, didn't you? You sent him there. Her voice was raw, filled with an anguish that pierced Aizawa's chest. Eri, it's not that simple, he began, his tone careful but firm. Midoriya made choices. Shut up, she screamed, her tiny hands balling into fists. "You're lying. You're a liar. My brother didn't do anything wrong." Isawa froze, stunned by the venom in her words. She had never spoken to him like this before. "I hate you," 𝗧𝗓𝗏 shouted, her voice cracking with the force of her emotions. "You're a monster. How could you do this to him? To me?" "𝗧𝗓𝗏, listen to me." "No. I don't want to listen to you," she interrupted, standing up abruptly. Her small frame seemed to radiate with anger and heartbreak. "I called Auntie Nomuri. She's coming to get me. I don't want to stay here with you." Isawa felt his stomach drop. 𝗧𝗓𝗏, I don't care. You took him away. I hate you. I hate you so much. If you died, I wouldn't even come to your grave." Her words cut deeper than any villain's attack ever could. Isawa stood frozen as 𝗧𝗓𝗏 ran to her room, slamming the door behind her. He could hear her sobbing, her cries muffled but no less heartbreaking. Back in the present, Isawa rubbed his temples, his exhaustion amplified by the weight of his memories. He had tried to protect her, to shield her from the chaos of the world, but in doing so, he had inadvertently caused her the greatest pain she had ever known. He had watched her cry herself to sleep that night, her sobs echoing in his mind long after the house had gone silent. It had been the first time since her rescue that she had cried so openly, so brokenly. And it was the first time she had directed all her pain at him. Isawa sighed, his hands tightening into fists. He had made his choice, believing it was for the greater good, but it had come at a cost he hadn't foreseen. And though 𝗧𝗓𝗏's words had been spoken in anger and grief, they had left a scar on his heart that refused to heal. "I failed her," he muttered to himself, his voice barely audible in the quiet room. "I failed them both." The thought of 𝗧𝗓𝗏's tear-streaked face and trembling voice haunted him still, a constant reminder of the fragile line he walked as both a hero and a guardian. Meanwhile, with 𝗳𝗏𝗵𝗃 the sky was a somber gray, as if the heavens themselves mirrored the turmoil in young Kota's heart. He ran with all his might, his small legs pounding against the dirt path that led away from his aunt's home. His backpack, hastily packed with essentials, bounced on his back as tears streamed down his face. He didn't care where he was going. All he knew was that he needed to find his brother, his real brother, Izuku Midoriya. "Kota! Stop!" His Aunt Mandalay shouted from behind him, her voice cracking with desperation. But Kota didn't stop. He couldn't. His brother, his hero, was in trouble, and he wouldn't let anyone stand in his way. Not even his aunt. "Kota, please." Mandalay's voice grew closer as she chased after him, her breath ragged. She finally caught up and grabbed his arm, forcing him to stop. He struggled against her grip, his face twisted with anger and heartbreak. "Let me go, Auntie," he shouted, trying to wrench himself free. "Kota, listen to me. You can't just run off like this." Mandalay's voice was firm, but her eyes were filled with tears. "You don't understand." Kota screamed back, his voice raw. "Brother Izuku didn't do anything wrong. He's not a villain. He's a hero. He's the only real hero." Mandalay knelt down to his level, her hands trembling as she held onto him. "Kota, I know this is hard, but..." "No, you don't." Kota interrupted, his voice breaking. "You don't understand at all. All those fake heroes, they just care about being famous and looking good on TV. But brother Izuku, he saved me. He saved you. And now he's in jail." "Why, Auntie?" "What?" Mandalay's heart broke at the sight of his anguish. She had seen him angry before, disillusioned with heroes after the death of his parents, but this was different. This was the pain of a child who had lost the one person who had reignited his belief in heroism. "Kota," she began softly, her voice shaking, "sometimes things aren't as simple as they seem. The world isn't fair, and sometimes even good people don't." Kota shouted, cutting her off. His small fists clenched at his sides, his face red with frustration. "Don't say he's guilty. He's not. He's my brother, and he would never hurt anyone." Mandalay felt tears spill down her cheeks as she pulled him into a tight hug. "I know, Kota. I know you love him. And I know he's a good person. But running away won't help him. You have to trust me. We'll figure this out together." Kota pushed her away gently, his tear-streaked face filled with defiance. "No. You don't get it. I don't trust any of you heroes anymore. The real heroes like Brother Izuku get locked up, and the fake ones keep smiling for the cameras. I hate them. I hate all of them. His words hit 𝗵𝗲𝗍 like a physical blow. She had always known Kota's feelings about heroes were complicated, but to hear him speak with such venom it was almost too much to bear. Kota, she whispered, her voice trembling. I hate them, Auntie. Kota repeated, his voice rising. Why do the good ones suffer while the fake ones get to keep pretending? It's not fair. 𝗵𝗲𝗍 reached out to him again, but he stepped back, his small frame shaking with emotion. I'm going to find Brother Izuku, he said firmly, wiping his tears away. And I'm going to prove he's a hero. A real hero. Just like he proved it to me. Before 𝗵𝗲𝗍 could respond, Kota turned and began walking back toward the house. His steps were heavy with determination, his tears drying on his cheeks. 𝗵𝗲𝗍 watched him go, her heart aching with the weight of his words. As she followed him, she couldn't help but wonder if Kota was right. Had the hero world truly failed someone as pure-hearted as Izuku Midoriya? And if it had, what did that mean for the ideals they had all sworn to uphold? 𝗵𝗲𝗍 entered the living room of the house, her shoulders slumped from the emotional weight of her conversation with Kota. Inside, her fellow pussycats, Ragdoll, Pixie Bob and Tiger, were seated around the table, their expressions a mixture of concern and unease. They had been discussing the latest updates on Izuku Midoriya, the young hero whose fall from grace had shaken the nation. When they saw 𝗵𝗲𝗍, Pixie Bob was the first to speak. Is Kota okay? She asked, her tone hesitant but filled with worry. 𝗵𝗲𝗍 sighed and rubbed her temples. No, not really, she admitted, sitting down heavily in a chair. He's devastated. He was trying to run away, just now said he wanted to find Midoriya. Ragdoll gasped, her usually energetic demeanor dampened by the seriousness of the situation. Oh no, poor Kota, he must be so confused. It's not just confusion, 𝗵𝗲𝗍 said, her voice thick with emotion. He's angry. He thinks we've all betrayed Midoriya. He doesn't trust heroes anymore, not that he ever fully did, but now it's worse. He kept saying Midoriya is the only real hero, and the rest of us are just fakes. Tiger leaned forward, his brows furrowed in thought. It's understandable, he said in a low voice. Kota's always been wary of heroes. Midoriya was probably the first person who changed his mind. Seeing someone he admires so much being labeled as a villain, it's bound to make him question everything. Pixie Bob nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. But how do we help him? How do we make him see that we're not the bad guys in this? That we're just as shocked and hurt as he is? 𝗵𝗲𝗍 shook her head. I don't know if we can, she said quietly. He's too young to understand the complexities of what's happening. And honestly, I'm not even sure I fully understand it myself. Midoriya, he was always so determined, so selfless. It's hard to believe he'd ever willingly hurt anyone. Ragdoll spoke up, her voice uncharacteristically subdued. Do you think there's more to the story? Something we're not being told? Tiger glanced at her, his expression grim. There usually is. The media loves a good villain story, especially when it's about someone who used to be a hero. But even if there is more to it, it doesn't change the fact that Midoriya's actions, whatever they were, have consequences. And Kota is stuck in the middle of it. 𝗵𝗲𝗍 looked down at her hands, her fingers trembling slightly. When I held him just now, he was shaking so much. He kept saying that it's not fair, that the real heroes get punished while the fake ones thrive. And you know what? He's not wrong. Midoriya didn't just save Kota that day at the training camp. He gave him hope. And now that hope is gone. The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over them like a heavy fog. For a moment, no one knew what to say. Finally, Ragdoll spoke, her voice firm despite the sadness in her eyes. Then we need to be there for him. Even if he doesn't trust us right now, even if he's angry, we can't give up on him. Kota needs to know that we're still his family, no matter what. 𝗵𝗲𝗍 nodded, though her heart still ached. You're right, she said softly. But it's going to take time. And in the meantime, we need to figure out how to help him process all of this. Because right now he's carrying the weight of the world on his little shoulders. 𝗵𝗃𝗲𝗄 reached across the table to place a comforting hand on Mandalay's arm. "We'll get through this together," she said, her voice gentle but resolute. "For Kota. And for Midoriya." Mandalay managed a small smile, though her eyes remained clouded with worry. "I hope so," she said quietly. "I really hope so." The weeks that followed were marked by a stark change in Kota. He no longer ran to greet his aunt when she came home. He barely spoke during meals. But most noticeable of all was the way his demeanor shifted from defiance to quiet determination. Kota spent hours in solitude, training by himself. His quirk, once seen as simple and unremarkable, began to evolve. The gentle manipulation of water he had once displayed transformed into something far more powerful and dangerous. One evening, Mandalay found him standing in the middle of the backyard, his hands raised as a massive column of ice spiraled into the air. "Kota," she called out hesitantly. He didn't respond at first, his focus entirely on the intricate formation of the ice. It twisted and turned like a living creature, sharp edges gleaming in the moonlight. His hair, once a dark brown, had lightened to a stark white, as though reflecting the frozen power he now wielded. When he finally turned to face her, his expression was cold and unreadable. "I'm going to get stronger," he said simply, his voice devoid of the emotion that had once fueled his outbursts. Mandalay's heart clenched. "Kota, what are you doing? Why are you—" "Because heroes can't be weak," he interrupted, his gaze piercing. "Real heroes don't get locked up for doing the right thing. If I want to save brother Izuku, I need to be strong enough to fight for him. Strong enough to prove he's innocent." Mandalay stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Kota, you don't have to carry this burden alone. We're here for you." He shrugged her hand off, his eyes narrowing. "You're wrong. I do have to do it alone. Because no one else will. Not the heroes. Not the police. No one. Just me." With that, he turned back to his training, his movements fluid and precise as he commanded the ice to obey his will. Mandalay watched him, her chest tightening with a mix of pride and heartbreak. She couldn't deny the power he was developing, but she feared the cost of his determination. The boy who had once been so full of love and laughter was now a shadow of himself, driven by a single, all-consuming goal: to clear Izuku Midoriya's name and restore the ideals of heroism that had been shattered before his eyes. And as Kota's ice spiraled higher into the night sky, Mandalay couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of his journey, a journey that would change him forever. The boy who hated heroes was now becoming one himself, not out of admiration, but out of necessity. And in his heart, the words, "Brother Izu," echoed like a mantra, guiding him through the storm. Somewhere else in a hidden base, the dim light of the base flickered as Izuku Midoriya stood silently, his changed form casting a long shadow against the cold walls. His once vibrant emerald green eyes were gone, replaced by an unsettling contrast, black sclera and glowing white pupils that seemed to pierce through the darkness. His jet black hair fell messily over his face, framing a hardened, stoic expression that had become his new identity. Gone was the soft, hopeful boy who dreamed of becoming the greatest hero. What remained was someone who had endured betrayal, despair, and injustice, yet still stood tall. Behind him, 𝗬𝗪𝗐 leaned casually against a wall, his arms crossed, watching Midoriya with a mixture of concern and understanding. Lady Nagant sat nearby, her sniper rifle resting across her lap, her sharp eyes fixed on the monitors that displayed the images of two children. On one screen, Eri was training her quirk, her small hands glowing faintly as she focused on reversing the damage to a wilted flower. Her face was serious, determined, yet there was a softness in her eyes, a reflection of the love and trust she still held for her big brother. On the other screen, Kota was in the midst of a grueling training session, his breath visible in the cold air as he wielded his ice-encrusted sword. His white hair clung to his forehead, drenched with sweat, as he pushed himself harder and harder, his expression a mix of anger, sadness, and unwavering resolve. Midoriya's gaze lingered on the screens, his emotionless demeanor betraying a flicker of pain deep within. His hands, scarred and calloused, rested on the control panel as he whispered to himself, his voice barely audible. I see you, Eri, trying to heal the world piece by piece. And you, Kota, pushing yourself beyond your limits for my sake. I never wanted this for you. I never wanted either of you to carry this burden. His words hung in the air, heavy with regret. Despite the coldness in his appearance, his heart ached for the two children who had come to mean so much to him. He had watched over them from the shadows, ensuring their safety even as the world labeled him a villain. I'll meet you two one day, he said softly, his voice steady but filled with quiet determination. Eri, Kota, your brother, is still here. Don't forget that. Todo, who had been silent until now, pushed himself off the wall and walked over to Midoriya, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. You know, bro, you don't have to do this alone. They'll understand someday. They'll see why you had to walk this path. Lady Nagant glanced over, her voice calm yet resolute. You've already done more for them than most would. But if you're going to face them one day, make sure you're ready, not just to fight, but to explain. They deserve that much. Midoriya didn't respond immediately, his eyes still fixed on the screens. He saw Eri smiling faintly as she successfully restored the flower, and Kota summoning his ice dragon with a roar of determination. His lips tightened into a thin line, the faintest hint of a smile ghosting across his face before vanishing. They deserve more than me, he said finally, his voice low but firm. But I'll give them everything I have, even if it takes the rest of my life. As the monitors flickered, casting a soft glow over the room, Midoriya turned away, his dark silhouette blending into the shadows. The room was silent, save for the faint hum of monitors displaying various feeds, one of which showed Kota tirelessly training and Eri refining her quirk. Without looking at them, Midoriya broke the silence, his deep, commanding voice slicing through the air like a blade. I've found someone, he began, his tone steady yet weighted with meaning. Another individual worthy of standing by our side. She will be my third commander. Nagant's sharp eyes narrowed slightly, curiosity sparking in her expression. Who is she? She asked, her voice calm but tinged with interest. And when will we meet her? Todo leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, a faint smirk playing on his lips. Sounds like someone special, boss. What's the holdup? Let's bring her in already. Midoriya finally turned his head toward them, his expression as stoic as ever, but his eyes carried a flicker of something deeper, determination. She's not available yet, he explained, his voice unwavering. She'll be ready by tonight. That's when I'll bring her here. Nagant exchanged a glance with Todo, her sharp features softening slightly as she nodded. If you've chosen her, then she must be exceptional. We'll wait. Todo chuckled, pushing off the wall with a shrug. Well, if she's got your approval, I'm curious to see what she's made of. Midoriya leaned back in his chair, his gaze returning to the screens. His voice dropped to a softer, almost reflective tone. She has her own struggles, her own reasons. But I see her potential, her strength. She'll be a powerful ally. Nagant stepped closer, her voice lowering as she spoke with quiet confidence. We trust your judgment, Midoriya. When the time comes, we'll be ready to welcome her. Todo grinned, his enthusiasm evident. Can't wait to see what she brings to the table. Midoriya gave a slight nod, his eyes never leaving the screens. Prepare yourselves, he said, his voice firm yet calm. The night will bring change. And with her, we take another step forward. As the two left him to his thoughts, Midoriya sat in silence, his mind focused on the task ahead. The weight of his decisions, his plans, and his promise to Eri and Kota hung heavy on his shoulders, but he remained resolute. For them, for his allies, and for the world he envisioned, he would not falter. Midoriya appeared in Garaki's dimly lit lab with a sudden crackle of energy, the air around him shifting ominously. His black sclera and white pupils glowed faintly in the sterile, cold environment. Beside him stood 𝗬𝗧𝗏, towering with his intimidating frame, his eyes scanning the lab like a predator seeking its prey. On the other side, Lady Nagant had her sniper rifle trained on Garaki, her finger poised lightly on the trigger, ready to act at a moment's notice. Garaki turned around abruptly, his expression a mixture of fear and irritation as he recognized who had entered. Well, Midoriya, he said, his voice trembling slightly as he adjusted his glasses. What brings you here? Surely not for a pleasant reunion. Midoriya cut him off with a cold, emotionless tone, his voice carrying an edge that silenced the doctor immediately. Long time no see, Garaki. Looks like you've been making quite the use of my father's money. He began walking slowly toward the doctor, each step echoing ominously in the sterile room. Garaki adjusted his glasses, his attempt to regain composure faltering under Midoriya's piercing gaze. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, his voice shaking slightly. Your father's contributions were essential to the research that... Contributions. Midoriya repeated, his tone sharp as a blade. Don't twist your words. You stole from him, funneled his wealth into your personal experiments, and now you stand here pretending it was all part of some noble cause. His white pupils narrowed, the black scara making his gaze look even more inhuman. Todo smirked, cracking his knuckles as he stepped forward. Garaki, it's simple. You used someone else's money without permission. Where I'm from, that's a good way to lose a hand or two. Nagant's voice rang out from above, cold and calculating. I'd think twice about trying to talk your way out of this, Garaki. My rifle doesn't miss, and I'm just waiting for the word. Garaki's composure crumbled further, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. Now, he stammered, raising his hands as if in surrender. Let's not be hasty. Surely we can come to an understanding. I'm a scientist. Everything I've done has been for the advancement of... Save your excuses, Midoriya interrupted, his voice chillingly calm. He stopped a few feet away from the doctor, his presence towering. You've done nothing but build weapons and destruction. You've squandered my father's legacy on atrocities. And now, I'm here to put an end to it. Garaki swallowed hard, his usual arrogance nowhere to be seen. What do you want? He asked, his voice trembling. I can give you information, resources, anything you want. What I want, Midoriya said, his tone dropping to a dangerous low, is for you to stop using what doesn't belong to you. No more experiments. No more schemes. And no more stealing from my family. The room fell into an oppressive silence, the weight of Midoriya's words suffocating. Garaki nodded shakily, his hands trembling. Understood, he muttered, his voice barely audible. Midoriya turned without another word, his black hair catching the faint light as he began to leave. Todo cast one last glance at Garaki, his grin widening. Lucky for you, Garaki, Midoriya's a lot more patient than I am. Nagant lowered her rifle but didn't take her eyes off the doctor as she followed the others. Midoriya's eyes gleamed with a cold, menacing light as he looked down at Garaki. You know, there's one thing I want, he began, his voice low but laced with an undeniable authority. Remember that 𝗵𝗲 you sent to the training camp? The one with the tool quirk, the chainsaw and all. I want that quirk. You'll extract it and give it to me. Garaki's face paled and he stammered, 𝗧𝗵𝗵𝗃, its quirks are not easy to... Midoriya didn't let him finish. Not my problem, Garaki. You'll figure it out, he said icily, taking another step closer. His aura seemed to weigh down the air in the room, making it hard to breathe. And while we're at it, I want information on someone. Seline. He turned his head slightly, motioning toward the image of the woman with piercing blue eyes and sleek combat attire that now rested on a nearby table. As if he had conjured it into existence, he turned his head slightly, motioning toward the image of the woman with piercing blue eyes and sleek combat attire that now rested on a nearby table, as if he had conjured it into existence. Everything you have on her. Garaki's hands trembled as he tried to process the demands. Seline. That might take time. You have 24 hours, Midoriya interrupted, his tone flat and unyielding. If I don't have the information by then, your 𝗵𝗲, your experiments, and everything else you've worked on will cease to exist. And you, he leaned in slightly, his black scara and glowing pupils locking onto Garaki's. You'll be erased from this world. The finality in his words sent a chill down Garaki's spine. Lady Nagant, still perched above with her sniper aimed, spoke in a tone as sharp as the edge of her rifle. I'd listen to him if I were you. He's not the type to make empty threats. Todo smirked, cracking his knuckles for emphasis. You've got two options, 𝗬𝗏𝗃, comply or be obliterated. Your choice. 𝗬𝗏𝗃 swallowed hard, nodding frantically. Oh, of course, Midoriya. I'll get it done. The quirk and the information, you'll have them within 24 hours. Midoriya didn't respond, merely giving the doctor a lingering, icy stare before turning on his heel. See that you do, he said over his shoulder, disappearing into thin air with Todo and Nagant in tow, leaving 𝗬𝗏𝗃 alone in the suffocating silence of his lab. Midoriya paused for a moment after giving his final warning to 𝗬𝗏𝗃, his eyes narrowing in thought. Turning slightly, he spoke again, his voice echoing with authority. Call 𝗬𝗪𝗏𝗧𝗏. I want to finish something with the League of Villains. 𝗬𝗏𝗃 hesitated, his trembling hand reaching toward a nearby console. Why yes, of course. I'll contact him immediately. Nagant shifted her stance, keeping her sniper trained on the doctor. I hope you're not thinking of stalling. You're already on thin ice. Midoriya gave a curt nod, folding his arms as he waited. The faint hum of the machine filled the tense silence of the lab, and within moments, a swirling portal of black mist appeared, coalescing into the familiar form of 𝗬𝗪𝗏𝗧𝗏. His glowing eyes scanned the room before settling on Midoriya. Midoriya, 𝗬𝗪𝗏𝗧𝗏 greeted, his voice smooth yet wary. To what do I owe the pleasure of this unexpected summons? Midoriya stepped forward, his tone sharp and commanding. There are loose ends with the League that I need to tie up. You'll take me to them now. 𝗬𝗪𝗏𝗧𝗏 tilted his head slightly, the mist around him rippling as if in thought. The League's movements are unpredictable as of late. Are you certain this is the time? Midoriya's gaze hardened, the air around him growing heavier. I didn't ask for your opinion, 𝗬𝗪𝗏𝗧𝗏. Just open the portal. Todo smirked, cracking his knuckles as he stepped up beside Midoriya. Looks like it's going to be an interesting reunion. Don't keep us waiting. 𝗬𝗪𝗏𝗧𝗏 sighed, bowing his head slightly. As you wish. With a wave of his hand, the swirling portal expanded, revealing a dimly lit hideout on the other side. Midoriya glanced at Nagant and Todo. Let's go. It's time to remind them who they're dealing with. Without waiting for a response, he stepped through the portal, his presence radiating authority and unrelenting purpose. Nagant and Todo followed close behind, ready for whatever awaited them on the other side. As Shigaraki's hands twitched, his decay quirk activating with a sudden jolt, Nagant moved faster than anyone could react. Her sniper cracked through the tension-filled room, a perfect shot landing on Shigaraki's hand, forcing him to reel back in pain. His fingers spasmed, the deadly decay dissipating before it could touch Midoriya. Shigaraki growled in fury, his crimson eyes glaring up at Midoriya with venom. But before he could even make another move, Midoriya's expression darkened. His hand shot forward, grabbing Shigaraki by the head. The room echoed with a sickening crunch as Midoriya's strength crushed Shigaraki's skull like it was paper, the self-proclaimed king of villains collapsing lifelessly at his feet. The room was silent. Everyone, from 𝗬𝗪𝗏𝗧𝗏 to the lingering League members, froze in shock. Midoriya stood tall over Shigaraki's body, his presence now utterly commanding and terrifying. Pathetic, Midoriya muttered coldly. He was nothing more than a broken tool, a product of my father's twisted experiments. He was never fit to lead, only to destroy himself. As then Midoriya asked for a towel and water as he removes the BLD from his hands, as he now also has the decay quirk his father gave to Tamura as he wiped his hands clean. Know this, he began, his voice echoing in the tense silence. My father is dead. All for one is no more, and the era of his manipulations ends here. I am now the one who holds the League of Villains under my control. 𝗬𝗪𝗏𝗧𝗏 straightened slightly, his mist swirling as if absorbing the gravity of the declaration. The remaining members exchanged nervous glances, the weight of Midoriya's proclamation settling in their minds. I have no patience for disobedience or incompetence, Midoriya continued, his tone icy. Shigaraki was a failure, a shattered puppet of my father's will. But now, the League answers only to me. And under my leadership, we will reshape everything. He turned sharply to 𝗬𝗪𝗏𝗧𝗏. Call all the members. Every last one of them. I want them here immediately. Those who refuse or question my authority will be dealt with harshly. 𝗬𝗪𝗢𝗍 nodded, his loyalty now fully aligned with Midoriya. As you command, 𝗧𝗵𝗲. I will summon them at once. Midoriya's emerald eyes glinted with a mix of determination and cold fury as he crossed his arms. Good. We have work to do. A new order begins now, and I will not tolerate any weakness. Nagant, standing nearby with her sniper resting on her shoulder, smirked slightly. Looks like the league just got a real leader, she muttered under her breath, earning a chuckle from Todo. Midoriya didn't acknowledge the comment, his mind already focused on the future. By the time the sun rises, he said with finality, the league will know exactly who I am and what I stand for. This is the beginning of a new reign, one far beyond my father's reach. Midoriya stood tall as the grotesque Nomu, equipped with the tool quirk, teleported before him. Its twisted body exuded raw power, the chainsaw blades protruding from its arms humming with menace. But Midoriya was unfazed, his emerald eyes gleaming with an icy determination. Perfect timing, he muttered, stepping forward as his cursed energy surged. Without hesitation, he reached out, his hand glowing with a sinister energy. The Nomu's quirk was torn from its body, absorbed seamlessly into Midoriya's own. The creature crumbled lifelessly to the ground as Midoriya's body began to morph. Metallic chainsaws erupted from his arms and head, spinning to life with a deafening roar. Metallic chainsaws erupted from his arms and head, spinning to life with a deafening roar. His entire form radiated an aura of pure chaos, resembling a figure straight out of the pages of a pre-quirk era manga. Midoriya examined his new form, flexing his arms as the chainsaws revved menacingly. A smirk tugged at his lips. So this is what power feels like, he muttered. I've seen this before. Chainsaw Man fitting. Nagant raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. And what exactly do you plan to do with that form? She asked, her tone sharp. Midoriya turned to her, his voice steady and cold. Seline. Her most powerful vampire quirk won't stand a chance against this. The chainsaws disrupt regeneration. I'll cut through her invincibility like it's nothing. He glanced at 𝗬𝗪𝗢𝗍, his voice taking on a commanding edge. Prepare a training ground. I need to test this form. Send me somewhere remote, where I can push this power to its limit. 𝗬𝗪𝗢𝗍 nodded without hesitation, opening a swirling portal. As you wish, 𝗧𝗵𝗲. The training ground is ready. Without another word, Midoriya stepped into the portal, the roar of his chainsaws echoing ominously as he disappeared into the void. Behind him, Nagant and 𝗬𝗪𝗢𝗍 exchanged glances, both knowing that with this new power, Midoriya was preparing to become an unstoppable force. 24 hours later, Midoriya returned from his training. The eerie silence that accompanied him was unsettling, his demeanor calm yet unnervingly cold. His appearance had reverted to normal, but his aura told a different story. His jet-black hair fell over his forehead, while his eyes, black sclera with chilling white pupils, exuded a terrifying, emotionless intensity. Midoriya stepped into the room where 𝗬𝗪𝗢𝗍, Nagant, and 𝗵𝗲 were waiting. His voice was steady, his tone leaving no room for argument. 𝗬𝗪𝗢𝗍, he began, addressing the scientist, send me Seline's location. It's time to recruit her. 𝗬𝗪𝗢𝗍, his hands trembling slightly as he typed into a console, nodded. Why yes, Mr. Midoriya. The coordinates will be sent to 𝗬𝗪𝗢𝗍 shortly. Midoriya shifted his gaze to 𝗬𝗪𝗢𝗍, his unsettling eyes locking onto him. When the location comes through, teleport me there immediately. And treat them, he gestured toward Nagant and Todo without looking at them, with whatever they want. Ensure their needs are met while I handle this. Nagant, leaning casually against the wall, smirked slightly. You're in quite the generous mood today, she remarked, though her sharp eyes betrayed her curiosity about the meeting with Seline. Todo grinned, his usual boisterous energy in contrast to the tension in the room. Well, if you're handling this yourself, I'll take some good food while you're out, he said, laughing lightly. Midoriya didn't respond to their comments. Instead, he turned back to 𝗬𝗪𝗢𝗍, whose portal began to swirl as the location data arrived. Without hesitation, Midoriya stepped forward, his black boots echoing ominously against the floor. "I won't be long," he said coldly, stepping into the portal. His chainsaw-enhanced form may not have been visible, but the memory of it lingered in everyone's mind, a reminder of the terrifying power he now wielded. The portal swirled violently as Midoriya stepped through, arriving at a desolate port under the cover of night. The salty air carried the faint sound of waves crashing against the dock. Before him stood Seline, her piercing blue eyes glowing in the dark, surrounded by her loyal followers. Each of them radiated an intimidating presence, their stances oozing confidence and power. Seline herself stood with an air of regal depth, her black leather suit glinting faintly under the moonlight. Midoriya's cold gaze settled on her. "Seline," he began, his voice devoid of emotion, "I've come to make you an offer. I'm forming a group of 10 commanders with unmatched strength. Together, we will destroy this broken society and rebuild it the way it should be. I want you to be part of it." Seline raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a smirk. "And if I refuse?" she asked, her tone laced with amusement. Midoriya's expression remained unchanging. "Then I'll find other ways to make you work for me," he replied coldly. "Your answer determines whether this is easy or not." Seline's smirk widened into a cold grin. "I don't take kindly to threats, child." She motioned to her people. "Show him why." Her followers rushed forward, each unleashing their full strength. But Midoriya remained still, his body taut and unwavering. As they attacked, he moved with calculated precision, dismantling each opponent with brutal efficiency. His punches broke bones with a single strike, his kicks sent bodies flying, and his movements were so sharp that even the most seasoned fighters couldn't keep up. He didn't use his quirks, he didn't need to. His body, trained to the point of being as hard as the strongest metal, delivered devastation with every blow. The port was soon littered with broken bodies, their groans of pain echoing in the night. Seline watched, her smirk fading into a more serious expression. "Impressive," she muttered. "You've been trained well." Midoriya stepped forward, his boots crunching against the debris on the ground. "This is your last chance," he said coldly, his eyes narrowing. "Join me or face me." Seline chuckled darkly, her demeanor shifting. "Well, so you are powerful. Let's see how long you can keep up." She spread her arms, her body transforming as her vampire form took hold. Her eyes glowed 𝗵𝗃𝗬𝗓, her fangs bared as her aura darkened the entire area. Her strength and speed increased exponentially, and her presence became suffocating. Midoriya didn't flinch. Instead, he reached for the tool quirk he had absorbed. His body shifted and transformed into his Chainsaw Man form, the roar of chainsaws slicing through the air. His black sclera and white pupils glowed with an unearthly intensity, and his chainsaws dripped with raw power. "I won't hold back," Midoriya said, his voice distorted and chilling. The two figures faced off, their power radiating through the port like a brewing storm. The battle for Demps had begun. The night erupted into chaos as Seline and Midoriya clashed in an ultimate battle that shook the very foundations of the port. Seline's vampiric form moved with impossible speed, her claws slicing through the air with deadly precision. She darted around Midoriya like a blur, striking him from every angle, her enhanced strength tearing through concrete and steel as if they were paper. But Midoriya, now fully transformed into his Chainsaw Man form, was a wild storm of destruction. His chainsaws roared, shredding through everything in his path, buildings, cargo containers, even the ground beneath them. Seline launched herself into the air, her claws aimed at Midoriya's chest. He intercepted her midair, swinging his chainsaw arm upward with a deafening roar. The clash sent shockwaves rippling through the port, shattering nearby windows and collapsing weakened structures. "You're strong," Midoriya growled, his voice distorted and inhuman, "but you're not unstoppable." Seline hissed, her glowing red eyes narrowing as she landed gracefully on a pile of rubble. "And you think you are?" She spat, blood dripping from a cut on her arm. She leaped forward again, this time faster, using the darkness to her advantage. Midoriya turned, his chainsaw ripping through the air in a wide arc, barely missing her as she ducked and slashed at his side, drawing sparks from his hardened body. The battle raged on, both combatants relentless. Midoriya's chainsaws tore through everything Seline threw at him, while her vampiric agility allowed her to dodge his wild swings and land calculated strikes. Buildings crumbled around them, explosions of debris and dust filling the air as their battle escalated into a catastrophic display of power. Finally, Seline made a critical mistake. She lunged at Midoriya in an all-out assault, aiming to overwhelm him. But Midoriya anticipated her move. With a feral growl, he drove his chainsaw arm upward, slashing across her chest and sending her flying backward into a crumbling wall. Seline crashed to the ground, blood pouring from the deep wound. She struggled to stand, her breaths ragged, her once 𝗵𝗵𝗃 aura now flickering. Midoriya approached her slowly, his chainsaw arms still roaring, dripping with her blood. His black sclera and white pupils burned with cold determination. "Enough, Seline," he said, his voice echoing with authority. "You've lost. Your strength is undeniable, but it's not enough to defeat me." Seline coughed, her gaze defiant even in defeat. "You think this makes you my superior?" she asked, her voice laced with pain and bitterness. Midoriya knelt before her, the chainsaws on his arms retracting as his form returned to normal. His cold, emotionless expression didn't waver. "I don't care about superiority. I care about results. Join me, Seline. Be my commander. Together, we'll tear this rotten society apart and create something better." Or, he leaned closer, his tone chilling. "I'll find someone else who can." Seline stared at him, her pride clashing with the reality of her injuries. After a long moment, she let out a bitter chuckle. "You're as relentless as you are powerful," she admitted, her voice softening. "Fine. I'll join you, but don't think for a second I'll bow to you." Midoriya's cold, calculating gaze bore into Seline as he stood mere inches from her. His tone was icy and commanding, his words laced with an unyielding threat. "Know this, Seline," he began, his voice low and menacing. "If I ever hear of you trying to sell me or anyone in my team to the heroes or another villain group, your death will not come swiftly. It will be slow, excruciating, and a lesson for anyone who dares to betray me." Seline, despite her injuries and exhaustion, felt a strange heat rising in her cheeks. She didn't know why, but his unflinching 𝗵𝗃, the raw power he exuded, and the way he asserted control over everything stirred something within her. Her heart raced, and she suddenly realized she was blushing. "Understood," she stammered, trying to play it off, but her usual composed demeanor faltered. She quickly turned her head to avoid his piercing stare, her cheeks flushed a deep crimson. "What is wrong with me?" she thought, frustrated at her reaction. Midoriya, oblivious to her flustered state, or perhaps simply uninterested, turned away, his focus already shifting back to the larger plan. "Good. Then let's move. We have work to do," he said curtly, walking toward the portal Kurogyari had opened. Seline stole a glance at him as he moved, her face still warm, and muttered under her breath, "What kind of man is he?" Despite herself, she couldn't shake the strange pull she felt toward him, both unnerving and intriguing. She clenched her fists, forcing herself to refocus. "Get it together, Seline," she whispered to herself before following him through the portal. Midoriya stepped forward, his expression cold and unreadable as he approached Seline. Without a word, he extended his hand and pressed it lightly against her injuries. A warm glow emanated from his touch as his healing quirk began to mend her wounds. Seline winced slightly at first but soon felt the pain fade away, replaced by a soothing warmth. She glanced up at him, her earlier defiance replaced by silent curiosity. "You'll need to be in peak condition," Midoriya stated flatly, his tone devoid of emotion. "You're no good to me, broken." Once her injuries were fully healed, Midoriya turned sharply and motioned for Kurogyari to open a portal. Without hesitation, they stepped through, emerging in the dimly lit base. Waiting for them were Todoroki Aoi and Lady Nagant, both standing at attention. Their eyes shifted to Seline as Midoriya gestured toward her. "This is Seline," he announced, his voice commanding and direct. "She is now the third commander of this operation. Seline, introduce yourself." Seline straightened herself, her usual poise returning. "I am Seline, she said smoothly, her voice carrying an air of elegance and authority. I expect we'll work well together as long as you stay out of my way. Nagant raised an eyebrow but said nothing, while Todoroki offered a brief nod of acknowledgement. The tension in the room was palpable, yet there was an underlying current of mutual respect. Midoriya turned his back on them, his black sclera and cold white pupils making his presence even more intimidating. You can all talk amongst yourselves, he said, his voice echoing in the silence. I have other matters to attend to. Without waiting for a response, he strode out of the room, leaving the three commanders to exchange uncertain glances. As Seline looked after him, a small smirk tugged at the corner of her lips. This is going to be interesting. In the dimly lit room, Midoriya stood before his board, its surface filled with photographs of familiar faces, Class 1A and their parents. Strings connected images, forming a complex web of relationships. His cold, calculating eyes scanned the faces of his former classmates, each one a potential pawn, an obstacle, or a stepping stone in his plan. Who's going to pay the price next? He muttered under his breath, gripping the knife in his hand. His movements were deliberate as he took a step back, focusing on the faces staring back at him. His expression was unreadable, his black sclera and white pupils making him look otherworldly. With a flick of his wrist, he hurled the knife at the board. It sailed through the air, the blade embedding itself with a sharp thunk in one of the photos. Midoriya stepped forward, his gaze narrowing as he looked at the image the knife had struck. Midoriya's eyes darkened as he stared at Tsuyu's photograph, the hole where her face used to be now a glaring reminder of his intent. His grip on the knife tightened, his knuckles whitening with the force. "Ooh," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper, yet dripping with venom. "You were the one of them. Involved with those bears who dared to send me to that hellhole, to take away everything I had left." His hand trembled slightly, not with fear or hesitation, but with the sheer rage boiling beneath his composed exterior. He slammed the knife into the desk, the sound echoing through the room like a thunderclap. "So, first your parents," he said, his tone eerily calm, as if he were simply listing steps in a recipe. "I'll make them feel every ounce of the despair I was forced to endure. And then I'll make you watch as everything you hold dear crumbles right in front of you." Midoriya leaned closer to the board, his face illuminated by the faint, flickering light of the room. His black sclera and cold white pupils glowed faintly, adding an otherworldly menace to his expression. "You'll finally understand," he said, his voice dropping lower, almost to a growl. "You'll understand the pain, the betrayal, the suffering that comes from the hands of people you once trusted." Plus a bitter laugh escaped his lips, sharp and cutting. "I'll make sure every moment is etched into your memory, Tsu. Then, and only then, might you begin to comprehend the hell I went through because of you all." He straightened, his cold gaze now fixated on the board as he whispered, "Just wait and watch, 𝗧𝗵𝗄𝗏. Your time is coming, and when it does you'll beg for the end, just as I once did." The lively chatter of the Class 2A girls filled the air as they wandered through the crowded mall. Bags swung from their arms as they joked and laughed, the excitement of their shopping spree lighting up their faces. 𝗧𝗵𝗄𝗏, among them, had a small, relaxed smile as she examined a shop window. Suddenly, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw her mother's number on the screen. Pressing it to her ear, she answered in her usual calm tone, "Hello, Caro." On the other end, a familiar voice spoke urgently, "Tsu, I need you to come home for some work. It's important." Tsuyu frowned slightly but nodded. "All right, Mom. I'll head back soon, Caro. See you." She hung up and turned to the group. "I have to go. My mom needs help with something at home. I'll catch up with you all later, Caro." Her friends waved her off, oblivious to the sinister events unfolding behind the scenes. Elsewhere, Midoriya leaned back in his chair, his black sclera and white pupils glowing faintly in the dim room. A voice modulator sat on the desk before him, still active. A cold smirk tugged at his lips as he rested his chin on his hand. "The pieces are moving," he muttered to himself. "Time to see how loyal people really are when their lives are at stake." Behind him, Seline, Todo, and Nagant stood, waiting for his orders. Midoriya's gaze flicked toward them. "Todo," he said sharply, "you're handling Tsu's father. Make sure it's clean and quiet. Use a disguise and blend in. Don't let him suspect a thing until it's too late." Todo nodded firmly, adjusting his sleeves as he prepared to leave. "Nagant," Midoriya continued, his voice cold and commanding, "you're responsible for her mother. The same rules apply. Disguise yourself, act normal, and ensure she's isolated before you make your move." Nagant smirked faintly, her sniper instinct already kicking in as she nodded. Finally, Midoriya turned to Seline, his gaze sharper than before. "Her siblings are your targets. They're children, so I expect you to handle them efficiently. Blend in, use your charms, and don't arouse suspicion." Seline gave him a sly smile. "Consider it done, boss. They won't even see it coming." Midoriya leaned forward, his elbows resting on the desk, and clasped his hands. "You all know what to do. Make it seamless. This is more than just sending a message, it's about control. Act like normal people until the moment comes. Go now." The three nodded in unison, each heading out to fulfill their missions. The first move Todo adjusted his hat, ensuring it shadowed most of his face. His plain clothes and a slouched posture gave him the perfect guise of an ordinary man. Holding a crumpled map in his hand, he wandered aimlessly near 𝗬𝗧𝗏's family home. The air was quiet, save for the occasional chirping of birds. His sharp eyes scanned the area until they landed on Tsu's father, who was tending to the garden outside the house. Drawing a deep breath, Todo put on an embarrassed, friendly smile and approached. "Excuse me, sir," he said in a soft, slightly nervous tone, holding up the map. "I'm really sorry to bother you, but I seem to have gotten lost. Could you help me figure out where I am?" Tsu's father looked up, wiping his hands on his apron. He had a kind expression, the lines on his face softened by years of humility and hard work. "Oh, of course. Let me take a look at that map." Todo handed it over, watching closely as the man studied it. "You're looking for this area." Tsu's father pointed to a spot circled in red. "Yes." Todo nodded eagerly, scratching the back of his head. "It's supposed to be near here, but I must have taken a wrong turn." Tsu's father chuckled lightly. "Well, you're not far off. I can show you the way if you'd like. It's not too far from here." Todo widened his eyes, feigning relief. "Really? That would be amazing. Thank you so much, sir." The two walked side by side, Todo carefully guiding the conversation to appear as harmless as possible. "So," Todo began, glancing at the man, "do you live around here? This neighborhood seems peaceful." Tsu's father nodded. "Yes, my family and I have been here for years. It's a good place for kids to grow up." Todo smiled faintly, nodding as if taking mental notes. "That's great. Family's important." "Absolutely," Tsu's father said proudly. "My wife and I have worked hard to provide for our kids. They mean the world to us." Todo's grip on the map tightened slightly, but he kept his expression warm. "That's admirable, sir. You must be very proud of them." "I am," Tsu's father replied with a chuckle. "And what about you, young man? Do you have family nearby?" Todo hesitated for a fraction of a second, then sighed. "Not really. I've been on my own for a while now. That's probably why I'm so bad with directions." Tsu's father patted him on the shoulder. "Well, don't worry. You'll find your way eventually. Just keep going forward." Todo smirked inwardly at the irony of those words. As they approached an alley near the supposed destination, Todo slowed his pace, pretending to check the map again. "This is the place, right?" he asked, tilting the map for Tsu's father to see. The man leaned in, pointing to the spot on the map. "Yes, you'll want to go straight down this alley then." Todo's movements were sudden and precise. He grabbed Tsu's father by the arm, twisting it behind his back in one fluid motion. The older man cried out in pain, but Todo quickly clamped a hand over his mouth. "Shoo," Todo whispered coldly, his earlier nervous demeanor vanishing. "We wouldn't want to cause a scene, would we?" Tsu's father struggled, but Todo's strength was overwhelming. He dragged the man deeper into the alley, away from prying eyes. Why are you doing this?" Tsu's father gasped once Todo removed his hand. Todo leaned in close, his eyes sharp and unforgiving. Because someone very important has plans for you. Don't take it personally. The man's eyes widened in terror, but before he could scream, Todo delivered a swift blow to the back of his head, rendering him unconscious. Todo straightened his posture, pulling out a small communication device. "Target secured," he said into the device. Midoriya's voice came through, calm and cold. "Good. Bring him to the rendezvous point. Make sure no one sees you." Todo nodded to himself, hoisting the unconscious man over his shoulder. "Understood." As he made his way to the extraction point, Todo couldn't help but think of how easy it had been. The man had trusted him completely, and that trust had been his downfall. People like this, Todo muttered under his breath, have no idea how fragile their lives really are. With that, he disappeared into the shadows, leaving no trace of his presence behind. The deceptive encounter, Lady Nagant adjusted her loose, floral maternity dress, her hand resting lightly on the fake baby bump that completed her disguise. Her face was adorned with a soft, kind smile, one that masked the cold precision of a trained assassin. She moved carefully through the bustling shopping district, her grocery bags strategically overfilled to draw attention to her supposed struggle. Spotting Tsuyu's mother browsing a nearby stall, Nagant made her move. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said, her voice carrying a tone of desperation. "I'm so sorry to bother you, but I could really use some help. These bags are so heavy, and it's my first time expecting, and everything's so overwhelming." Tsuyu's mother turned to her, her warm, maternal instincts kicking in immediately. "Oh, of course. Let me help you with those." Nagant flashed a grateful smile, handing over a few bags. "Thank you so much. You're a lifesaver." As they walked through the busy streets, Nagant carefully steered the conversation. "So, do you have kids?" she asked, glancing at Tsuyu's mom with feigned curiosity. Tsuyu's mother smiled proudly. "Yes, I have 3. My eldest, Tsu, is a hero in training. She's doing so well in school." Nagant raised her eyebrows, pretending to be impressed. "Wow, a hero in training. That must be so exciting and nerve-wracking." "It is," Tsuyu's mom admitted. "But I'm so proud of her. She's always been so determined even as a child." Nagant nodded, as though genuinely interested. "That's wonderful. You must have done an amazing job raising her." Tsuyu's mom laughed modestly. "Oh, I just did my best. Every parent wants to see their kids succeed." After a while, Nagant suggested they take a break at a nearby cafe. Tsuyu's mother readily agreed, happy to help the seemingly overwhelmed, 𝗵𝗃 woman. Over coffee, Nagant kept the conversation light and warm, weaving bits of fabricated backstory into her dialogue. "This is my first child," Nagant said, resting her hand on her fake bump. "I'm so nervous. I keep thinking, what if I'm not good enough?" Tsuyu's mom reached across the table, patting Nagant's hand reassuringly. "Every new parent feels that way. But trust me, you'll figure it out as you go. And if you ever need advice, don't hesitate to ask." Nagant smiled softly, hiding the flicker of guilt that tried to creep into her mind. As they finished their coffee, Nagant stood, struggling to lift her overstuffed grocery bags. "Oh, these are heavier than I thought," she said, feigning exhaustion. "I don't suppose you could help me get them to my place. It's not far." "Of course," Tsuyu's mother replied without hesitation. They walked in silence for a while, the lively noise of the shopping district fading as Nagant led her to a quieter, more secluded area. Tsuyu's mother began to look around, her brows furrowing in confusion. "This area is awfully quiet," she remarked, stopping in her tracks. "Are you sure?" Before she could finish, Nagant struck. With one swift motion, she brought the butt of a concealed weapon down on Tsuyu's head, knocking her unconscious. Nagant muttered, dropping her disguise as she adjusted her gloves. "These undercover gigs are a pain. But at least this part's over." She activated her communicator, her voice calm and professional. "Target secured. Heading to the rendezvous point." As she lifted Tsuyu's mother onto her shoulder, Nagant spared a glance at the woman's peaceful, unconscious face. "Sorry, lady," she murmured, her tone devoid of malice. But this is just business. With that, she disappeared into the shadows, her mission flawlessly executed. Seline adjusted her appearance meticulously, ensuring she looked like an ordinary young woman. Her disguise was flawless: simple clothes, a casual hairstyle, and a warm, approachable demeanor. As she walked toward the rendezvous point where Tsuyu's siblings were waiting, she carried herself with practiced ease. Spotting the two younger siblings sitting on a bench in the park, Seline put on a friendly smile and waved enthusiastically. "Hey, you two," she called out, her tone light and cheerful. "Your parents asked me to pick you up. They're waiting for us at the cafe down the street." The siblings, though initially cautious, recognized Seline's fabricated friend persona from a prior introduction at one of Tsuyu's family events. Tsuyu's younger brother tilted his head. "Oh really? Tsuyune didn't say anything about you coming today?" he said suspiciously. Seline chuckled nervously, expertly weaving a believable excuse. "I know, right? It was last minute. Your mom asked me to help because she got held up shopping with Tsuyu's dad." The younger sister seemed convinced and tugged at her brother's sleeve. "Come on, Aniki, let's go. She's Tsuyune's friend, right?" Seline nodded reassuringly. "Of course. Your parents will be relieved to see you." As they walked, Seline subtly steered the siblings away from the crowded park and toward a quieter street. The siblings chatted among themselves, occasionally glancing at Seline, who played her part perfectly. "So," Seline began, feigning curiosity, "are you two excited about Tsuyu's hero training? I hear she's doing great things." "Yeah," the younger sister replied eagerly. "Tsuyune is amazing. She always works so hard." The brother, however, remained guarded. "Why didn't Tsuyu come with you? She usually lets us know if someone else is picking us up." Seline's smile didn't falter. "She wanted to come, but she's helping your mom carry groceries. You know how she likes to take care of everything herself." Her casual tone seemed to ease the boy's suspicions, though he still kept a watchful eye on her. As they approached a desolate alley, the younger brother stopped in his tracks. "Wait a minute," he said, his eyes narrowing. "This doesn't look like the way to the cafe." Seline sighed, dropping the pretense. "You're a sharp one, aren't you?" Before the siblings could react, Seline moved with inhuman speed. She knocked the boy unconscious with a precise strike to the back of his neck and caught the younger sister before she could scream. "Shoo," Seline whispered coldly, her voice losing its friendly edge. "It's nothing personal, kids. Just business." She activated her communicator, speaking with the calm efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. "Target secured. Moving to extraction point." As she hoisted the unconscious siblings over her shoulders, Seline couldn't help but smirk. "See you, you're going to learn what it feels like to lose everything. Just like he did." With her mission complete, Seline disappeared into the shadows, leaving no trace of the encounter behind. Afterwards, Tsu groaned softly as she regained consciousness, her vision blurry and her head throbbing. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she realized she was in a cold, damp warehouse. Her hands and legs were tightly bound to a chair. Panic surged through her as she tugged at the restraints to no avail. A familiar voice broke through the silence, smooth and cold, sending chills down her spine. "Hello, Tsu," the voice said. Her head snapped toward the source, and she saw a figure emerge from the shadows. Her head snapped toward the source, and she saw a figure emerge from the shadows. He had a sinister presence, his dark sclera and white pupils glowing faintly. Who are you?" Tsu asked, her voice trembling. The figure chuckled, stepping closer. "Of course. You wouldn't recognize me like this. It's been a while, hasn't it? Allow me to jog your memory." He leaned forward, his cold, emotionless eyes locking onto hers. "The one who stood beside you at the USJ. The one who saved you from Shigaraki's decay. Does that ring a bell?" Tsuyu's eyes widened as the realization hit her like a tidal wave. "No, it can't be Midoriya." A slow, mocking clap echoed in the room. "Bravo, Tsu. You figured it out. First try too," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Her heart pounded as fear began to creep in. "What are you doing? Why am I here?" Midoriya's lips curled into a menacing smirk. "Patience, Tsu. I'll explain everything soon enough. But first there's someone I'd like you to meet. He snapped his fingers, and suddenly, bright lights illuminated the room. Tsuyu gasped in horror as she saw her parents hanging from the ceiling, their hands bound by heavy chains. They were unconscious, their heads slumped forward. Tsuyu screamed, struggling against her restraints. Midoriya tilted his head, his expression devoid of empathy. Appealing reunion, isn't it? Tsuyu's voice cracked as she looked at him, tears streaming down her face. Why are you doing this? What do you want? Midoriya crouched down in front of her, his cold gaze piercing her soul. Oh, Tsu, you and your friends, your precious class 1, sent me to hell. You handed me over to the very people who destroyed my life. You turned your back on me just like everyone else. She shook her head desperately. I didn't. Enough. Midoriya's voice thundered, cutting her off. You and your family will pay for the suffering you've caused me. First, your parents. You'll finally understand what it feels like to lose everything. Tsuyu sobbed, pleading with him. Please, Midoriya. Don't hurt them. I'll do anything. Just let them go. Midoriya straightened, his smirk returning. Tsuyu, it's too late for bargains. But don't worry. I'll make sure you're around to witness every single moment of their pain. Tsuyu's heart froze as Midoriya snapped his fingers again. Another set of lights flickered on, illuminating a separate part of the warehouse. Her breath caught in her throat as she saw her younger siblings, 𝗵𝗲𝗄𝗏 and Satsuki, tied to chairs, their faces pale and frightened. No. 𝗵𝗲𝗄𝗏. Satsuki. She screamed, her voice filled with desperation. The two children looked at her, tears streaming down their cheeks. Nei-chan. Help us. 𝗵𝗲𝗄𝗏 cried out, his voice shaky. Tsuyu's body trembled as she whipped her head toward Midoriya, her fear now mixed with fury. Midoriya. Let them go. They're just kids. They haven't done anything to you. Midoriya turned his cold gaze to the children, then back to Tsuyu. Ah, family. Such an appealing bond, isn't it? It's almost poetic how fragile it is. He stepped closer to Tsuyu, his voice dropping to a chilling whisper. But you see, Tsuyu, I don't care about innocence. Your entire family is part of the equation now. Every single one of you will bear the weight of my suffering. Tsuyu's voice cracked as she pleaded, her eyes filled with tears. Midoriya, please. I'm begging you. Don't do this. Let them go. Take me instead. Just don't hurt them. Midoriya smirked, his expression as cold and unrelenting as ever. How noble of you, Tsu, offering yourself up as a sacrifice. But it doesn't work that way. This isn't about fairness or mercy. This is about retribution. Every one of them will pay just like you. Satsuki sobbed softly, her tiny voice breaking the heavy silence. Nei-chan, I'm scared. Midoriya's gaze flicked toward the girl, his tone mockingly soft. Scared? Oh, don't worry, little one. This is just the beginning. Tsuyu's body shook with helpless rage. You're a monster, Midoriya. How could you do this? Midoriya's smirk widened, his voice chillingly calm. A monster? Maybe. But I'm a monster you all created. And now you'll live with the consequences. He stepped back, his voice carrying across the room. Enjoy this moment, Tsuyu. It's the last time you'll see your family whole. Tsuyu screamed, struggling against her bindings, her heart breaking as she watched her siblings sob and her parents remain motionless in their chains. In the face of Midoriya's cold, unyielding demeanor, all she could do was beg and cry, her mind racing for a way to save her family. Midoriya's voice echoed through the warehouse, a deep, venomous edge lacing every word. He stepped closer to Tsuyu, his cold eyes boring into hers as he continued. Do you know what it feels like to watch the person you love most suffer because of something you didn't even do, Tsuyu? My mom, my kind, sweet mom, she was tortured. Humiliated. Broken. All because you and your so-called heroes pushed me into a corner. And where were you all? Living your lives as if nothing happened, as if I didn't exist. Well, I exist now. Tsuyu's tears streamed down her face as she looked at him, her voice trembling. Midoriya, I didn't know. I'm sorry for what happened to your mom, but... Midoriya roared, cutting her off. His voice shook with fury as he slammed his fist into a nearby wall, the force leaving a deep dent. Don't you dare try to justify it, 𝗬𝗠. You and your friends let it happen. You turned a blind eye. And now you'll all feel what it's like to lose everything, just like I did. He gestured toward her bound parents and siblings, their fear-stricken faces illuminated by the cold, sterile light. Look at them, 𝗬𝗠. Do they look strong to you? Do they look like heroes? They're weak. Just like you. And because of that weakness, they'll suffer just like my mom did. 𝗬𝗠's voice broke as she cried, her heart shattering with every word. Midoriya, please, if you're doing this for revenge, take it out on me. Not them. Please. I'll do anything. Midoriya leaned in, his face inches from hers, a twisted smile spreading across his lips. Oh, you'll do anything. That's rich. But it's too late for bargaining, 𝗬𝗠. I take revenge very seriously. And this is personal. He turned his back to her, his voice calm but no less menacing. You'll watch too. You'll watch as I take everything from you, piece by piece. And maybe then, you'll understand what I've endured. 𝗬𝗠 screamed, her voice raw and desperate. Midoriya. Stop this. Don't do this. You're not this person. But Midoriya didn't look back. His steps echoed in the warehouse as he walked away, leaving her tied to the chair, surrounded by the fear and suffering of her family. His last words lingered in the air like a death sentence. You and others made me this person, 𝗬𝗠. And now you all will pay the price. Midoriya's voice carried an eerie calm as he turned to Seline. Wake them up. I want them conscious for this. 𝗬𝗠 deserves to see the pain her actions, or lack of them, have brought. Seline smirked, her sharp fangs glinting in the dim light as she nodded. As you wish. With a swift movement, she walked over to 𝗬𝗠's parents, a cruel delight playing across her face. She snapped her fingers, and with her vampiric abilities, both parents were jolted awake, their groggy confusion quickly replaced by terror as they realized the chains binding them. 𝗬𝗠's breath hitched as she struggled against her restraints. No. Please, leave them out of this. It's me you're angry with. Midoriya shot her a cold glare, silencing her protests. You don't get to dictate anything here, 𝗬𝗠. Actions have consequences. Your parents raised you. They taught you. And they will share in your guilt. He turned to Nagant and Seline, his tone sharp. Nagant, Seline, hold the kids. Keep their eyes on their parents. They should understand that their sister and her friend's choices come with a price. Nagant sighed, her rifle slung over her shoulder, and approached 𝗬𝗠's siblings. Come on, little ones. Watch closely. Life lessons are important. Her tone was mocking but laced with a twisted sense of duty. She gripped the children by their arms, ensuring they couldn't look away. Seline grabbed the youngest sibling and crouched beside him, her voice honeyed but sinister. Don't cry now, little one. This is a show your dear sister paid for. You wouldn't want to miss it, would you? 𝗬𝗠 thrashed violently in her chair, her eyes wild with desperation. Midoriya, stop. This isn't justice, this is cruelty. Don't make the kids see this. They don't deserve it. Midoriya crouched in front of her, his face devoid of empathy. And my mom didn't deserve what she went through. I didn't deserve to be abandoned, betrayed, and hunted. But life doesn't care about fairness, does it? Now you'll understand that. 𝗬𝗠's parents, now fully alert, began begging for mercy, their voices trembling. Please, don't hurt our children. Punish us if you must, but let them go. Midoriya chuckled darkly, rising to his full height. Oh, you'll all get your turn. But for now, I think it's time we start. Seline, Nagant, make sure the kids don't miss a second of this. Midoriya's cold eyes locked onto 𝗬𝗠 as she struggled against her restraints. Do you really think shouting or trying to fight will help you here? He asked, his voice chillingly calm. Your defiance is pathetic. 𝗬𝗠's parents cried out, begging for their daughter's safety. Please, leave her alone. Whatever you're planning, just stop. Midoriya ignored their pleas. His gaze shifted to 𝗬𝗠, who, in a desperate bid to break free, lashed out with her tongue. The appendage shot toward him, aiming to strike, but with terrifying precision, Midoriya unsheathed a blade hidden in his coat and sliced her tongue cleanly. A spray of BLD hit the floor as Tsuyu's muffled screams filled the warehouse. She writhed in agony, BLD dripping from her mouth, her severed tongue lying motionless on the cold concrete. Midoriya crouched down, holding the blade close to her face, his voice low and icy. "You thought I wouldn't be ready for that. I know every trick you have, Tsu. Now, stay quiet. I'm not done yet." Her parents screamed in horror, their chains rattling as they thrashed in futile attempts to break free. "You monster! Stop this. She's just a child." Midoriya turned his attention to them, his smirk twisting into a cruel grin. "A child? You raised her to be part of a system that destroyed me and my family. You raised her to stand by while others like me suffered. Now you'll watch as I return the favor." He approached Tsuyu's father first, drawing out a scalpel he'd taken from Garaki's lab. "Let's start simple, shall we?" Without hesitation, he dragged the blade across the man's arm, leaving a deep, bleeding gash. "Feel that? That's just the beginning." Tsuyu's mother sobbed, tears streaming down her face. "Please, don't hurt him. Punish me instead." Midoriya turned to her with a mocking laugh. "Don't worry. Your turn is coming. I want you both to feel every ounce of the pain I've endured. You'll beg for mercy, just as my mother did." As Tsuyu groaned weakly, still bleeding from her mouth, Midoriya glanced back at her. "Don't worry, I'm making sure you get a front-row seat to all of this. You'll understand what happens when you cross me." He raised his voice to address Nagant and Seline. "Keep the siblings in line. They need to see this too. After all, it's a family affair." Seline held the youngest sibling tightly, her lips curling into a dark smile. "Oh, they're watching. Aren't you little ones?" Nagant, standing firm with her rifle at her side, added coldly, "You'll grow up knowing exactly what kind of person your sister really is." The screams and sobs echoed through the warehouse as Midoriya continued his methodical torture, every move calculated to break not just their bodies but their spirits. For Tsuyu, the horror was unbearable, as every second burned the reality of her family's suffering into her soul. Midoriya stepped back for a moment, admiring his handiwork with a detached, almost clinical expression. Tsuyu's father was bleeding heavily from several gashes on his arms and chest, while her mother trembled violently, tears streaming down her face as she tried to console her children from afar. The siblings sobbed, their cries muffled by Seline and Nagant's unrelenting grip. Midoriya turned his cold gaze back to Tsuyu, who was barely conscious. BLD dripped steadily from her mouth, her severed tongue a cruel reminder of her helplessness. "Do you feel it now, Tsuyu?" he said, his voice low but carrying an edge of venom. "The despair, the helplessness. This is what I felt every single day because of people like you. Because of the society you stood by and upheld." He motioned for Seline, who dragged Tsuyu's youngest sibling closer to the tortured parents. The child screamed, thrashing against her grip. "Let me go." Seline smiled darkly. "Oh, little one, you need to understand the cost of loyalty to this corrupt system. Your sister played her part, and now you get to see the results." Tsuyu, summoning what little strength she had, glared at Midoriya with hatred in her eyes, though she couldn't speak. Her muffled groans conveyed her defiance. Midoriya crouched before her, his icy gaze piercing through her. "That's it. You still have fight left in you. Don't worry, I'll make sure to snuff that out soon enough." He turned to Tsuyu's mother next, pulling a small, jagged knife from his coat. "Now, Mrs. Azui, tell me, how does it feel to see your daughter's actions bring ruin to your family? Do you regret raising her to be so blind?" Her voice cracked as she tried to reason with him. Please stop this. She's just a child. Whatever you've suffered, it's not her fault." Midoriya interrupted her with a bitter laugh. "Not her fault. She stood by and watched. She let it happen. Just like you did. Your entire family is complicit." He grabbed her arm and pressed the knife against her skin, drawing BLD. The siblings screamed louder, but Seline and Nagant held them firm. Nagant glanced at Midoriya. "Are you sure this is the way, boss? You've already made your point." Midoriya shot her a sharp look. "I decide when the point has been made. If you have an issue, you're welcome to leave. But remember who you answer to now." Nagant gave a slight nod, stepping back without another word. Turning his attention back to the parents, Midoriya stood over them, his presence towering and suffocating. You'll all pay for what you've done, but I want it to burn into your minds first. This isn't just revenge, it's justice. Justice for my mother, for me, and for everyone who was crushed under this so-called hero society. As the night wore on, Midoriya continued his cruel torment, ensuring that every scream, every tear, and every drop of blood served as a reminder of the pain he had endured. For Tsuyu, the once hopeful hero in training, the sight of her broken family would haunt her forever. Midoriya loomed over Tsuyu's mother, who was now trembling uncontrollably, her face streaked with tears. He held a jagged knife in his hand, the blade glinting under the dim light of the warehouse. The siblings, restrained by Seline and Nagant, cried uncontrollably, their small voices echoing in the cold, empty space. Tsuyu's brother shouted through his tears, "Please, stop. Don't hurt her anymore. Please, mister, let her go." Midoriya turned his head slightly toward the boy, his expression eerily calm. "Let her go. You're mistaken, child. She's here because of your sister's sins. This pain is a lesson, a consequence. Maybe one day you'll understand." Without another word, he dragged the blade across Mrs. Ajui's arm, leaving a deep gash. She screamed in agony, her body jerking against the chains that bound her. Blood dripped steadily onto the cold floor. Tsuyu's sister shrieked, her small body trembling as Seline tightened her grip. Nagant leaned down slightly, her voice low and almost pitying. "It's hard to watch, isn't it? But this is the world your sister helped create." Tsu, bound to her chair, groaned in frustration, her head thrashing as she tried to free herself. Blood dripped from her mouth where her tongue had been severed. Her muffled cries carried both anger and desperation. Midoriya glanced at her and smirked. "But Tsu, you're still trying to fight, even when it's hopeless. It's admirable, really. But tell me, does this feel heroic to you? Watching your family suffer because of your so-called ideals." Tsuyu's muffled screams only grew louder as she watched Midoriya turn his attention back to her mother. He placed the blade against her cheek, tilting her face up to meet his cold, unrelenting gaze. "Do you understand now, Mrs. Ajui? This is what your daughter's world leads to: pain, suffering, and death. You all stood by while people like me and my mother were crushed. Now you'll feel a fraction of what we endured." Mrs. Ajui sobbed, her voice barely audible through her trembling. "Please, please don't hurt my children, take me instead, but let them go." Midoriya's expression didn't waver. "Oh, they'll be fine, for now. They need to see this. They need to remember this moment for the rest of their lives." Seline whispered to the siblings, her tone laced with mock sympathy. "Watch closely, little ones. This is what happens when you trust heroes and their lies." Tsuyu's siblings cried even harder, their small hands desperately reaching out for their mother. Midoriya stepped back, letting the knife drop to the floor with a metallic clang. He reached out his hand, his fingers glowing faintly as he used a quirk to intensify the pain in Mrs. Ajui's wounds. Her screams echoed through the warehouse, drowning out the sobs of her children. He turned to Tsuyu once more, his voice cold and unfeeling. "This is only the beginning, Tsuyu. You and your family will know what it's like to lose everything. And when I'm done, you'll have nothing left but regret." As the siblings cried uncontrollably and Tsuyu's mother hung her head in defeat, the warehouse seemed to close in with an oppressive weight, the air thick with despair. Midoriya stepped back, his hands and clothing stained with blood. He looked down at Tsuyu's parents, who were now barely clinging to life, their bodies battered and broken. The room was filled with an eerie silence, broken only by the choked sobs of Tsuyu's siblings. Seline and Nagant released their grip on the children, who immediately collapsed to the floor, their small frames trembling from the trauma they had just witnessed. Their tear-streaked faces were twisted in confusion and despair as they stared at their parents' broken forms. Midoriya crouched down to their level, his voice disturbingly soft and gentle. "Do you see now? All of this is because of your sister. If she had chosen a different path, your family wouldn't have had to suffer. This pain is her fault." The younger brother, barely able to speak through his sobs, looked at Midoriya with wide, tear-filled eyes. Is it true? Did 𝗵𝗃 cause this? Midoriya nodded solemnly, his voice laced with feigned sympathy. Yes. She aligned herself with the heroes, the very people who allowed this broken society to destroy lives like mine and my mother's. She thought she was doing good, but all she did was bring destruction to her own family. The sister clung to her brother, her small hands gripping his arm tightly. Her voice was shaky and filled with anger. If she hadn't gotten involved, if she just stayed away, Mom and Dad wouldn't be like this. Tsu, tied to her chair, could only watch in horror. Her muffled cries of protest and anguish filled the air as she shook her head violently, trying to deny Midoriya's manipulative words. Midoriya turned to her, his eyes cold and unyielding. Look at what you've done, Tsu. Even your own siblings see the truth. You failed them. You failed your family. The siblings' sobs turned into cries of anger as they pointed accusing fingers at their restrained sister. This is your fault, the younger brother shouted, his voice cracking. If you hadn't been a hero, none of this would have happened. The sister chimed in, her face red and tear-streaked. You were supposed to protect us, but you ruined everything. We hate you. Midoriya stood and walked over to Tsu, leaning in close to her face. See, Tsu, I didn't even have to break them. You did that all on your own. He straightened up and looked back at the siblings. Now, children, the world doesn't have to be this cruel. If you trust me, I'll make sure you're never hurt like this again. But you must remember, heroes only bring pain. The siblings, their minds shattered and manipulated, nodded weakly, their trust in their sister completely eroded. Midoriya stood over Tsu's broken parents, his eyes cold and devoid of any empathy. He slowly pulled out a gun, the metallic glint catching the dim light of the warehouse. Without a word, he raised it and fired 2 shots, one for each parent. The sound of gunfire echoed through the warehouse as blood splattered across the ground. Tsu's parents slumped lifelessly, their final breaths choked with blood. Tsu's siblings gasped, their young minds unable to comprehend the horror unfolding before them. Before they could react, Midoriya turned to them with an almost playful grin, raising the gun again. Oh, don't look at me like that, he said mockingly. You're just collateral damage. 2 more shots rang out. The siblings fell to the ground, their small forms lifeless and crumpled. Midoriya exhaled, his twisted smile growing wider. Fear, I can smell it. It's intoxicating. He took a deep breath, closing his eyes as if savoring the moment. Tsu, tied to her chair, let out muffled screams of anguish, her body trembling with despair. Midoriya turned to her, his smile contorting into a grotesque expression of delight. Tsu, I didn't forget about you. You see, I like to make things personal. With deliberate slowness, he approached her and gripped her severed tongue, which he had cruelly kept. Wrapping it around her neck, he began to choke her, tightening it inch by inch. Tsu's struggles became frantic, her eyes filled with fear and regret as she gasped for air. Do you feel it, Tsu? Midoriya whispered in a low, chilling tone. This is what regret feels like. This is the price you pay for standing against me. Your death will be slow, painful, and unforgettable. Tsu's eyes widened in terror as she struggled helplessly, her breath fading with every passing second. Her struggles grew weaker until her body finally went limp, lifeless in the chair. Midoriya chuckled darkly, his voice echoing through the silent warehouse. Well, that was satisfying, he said, pulling out a sharp blade. With a single, swift motion, he severed Tsu's head, blood pouring onto the ground. He tied her tongue around her severed head, creating a grotesque display of his cruelty. Midoriya picked up the head and placed it carefully in a parcel, sealing it with precision. He attached a note, written in a chillingly calm handwriting. To you, hi, this is a reminder of what happens when you stand against me. Her body lies with her family. Let this serve as a warning to all heroes. Midoriya, he handed the parcel to Kurojirai. Deliver this to you. Make sure it reaches the faculty directly. Kurojirai nodded and teleported away, leaving Midoriya standing amidst the carnage. He glanced around the room, his eyes cold and calculating. Another loose and tied up. Time to move on to the next phase. With that, he walked out of the warehouse, leaving behind a scene of unspeakable horror and destruction.